Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this course on Excel 2021 Advanced. My name is Deborah Ashby and I'm an IT trainer and Microsoft subject matter expert with over 25 years experience of using and training Excel to students, customers and delegates all over the world. And I am very much looking forward to hosting this course for you. And what a course we have for you. If you're looking to upskill and move out of the catch-all intermediate Excel user category and become an absolute guru, then this is the course for you. And we're going to dive straight into the good stuff first. We're going to start out by taking a look at the new dynamic array functions available in Excel 2021. So things like unique, filter, sort, sort by, XLOOKUP, and so many more. We'll see how to combine functions together and create complex lookups. We'll delve into the world of statistical and math functions and explore functions like round, aggregate, rank, and COUNTBLANK. And if your thirst for formulas is not quenched by that stage, I'm going to show you two brand new game-changing Excel functions, let and lambda. The latter lets you create your own functions without the need for any programming knowledge. It's truly brilliant. Now, of course, no advanced course would be complete without at least taking a minor tour through some of the more advanced features of pivot tables and pivot chart techniques. And I'm going to show you how you can add more interaction into your worksheets by using things like form controls. And we'll finish out this course by taking a look at importing data from external sources, transforming it in Power Query, and we'll also predict the future with forecasting and learn the basics of automating our tedious tasks using macros and VBA. So there is so much for us to cover. Now, all of the files that I use in the videos are available for you to download from the course files folder. So if you want to follow along with me, then you can. Also, at the end of each section, there is an exercise so you can practice the skills that you've learned. So with all that said, and without further ado, grab yourself a drink and I will see you in the first lesson. The first exercise in this course is less of an exercise and more of a way to set ourselves up for success throughout this course. So I just want you to check a few prerequisites before we begin. Now, the first thing you need to make sure you do is that you download the course and the exercise files to your PC. You'll find them in a folder within this course. Just make sure that you save them off to a folder on your PC that's easily accessible. The second thing you need to check is the skill level of this course. This course is very much designed for advanced Excel users, so we won't be covering a lot of the basic things. So basic formulas, things like customizing the quick access toolbar and using basic functionality like cut, copy, paste. So make sure that you do at least have an intermediate level knowledge of Excel before attempting to run through this course. And if you need to, we do have an Excel 2021 for beginners and an Excel 2021 intermediate course for you to review if required. And finally, ensure that you're using the correct version. There are so many different versions of Excel out there. This course is very much designed for Excel 2021, which is the latest standalone version from Microsoft. I will say that if you've come to this course and you have a Microsoft 365 account, then the course is pretty much the same, because the standalone version of Excel 2021 was really designed to bring it in line with the features and functionality in the Microsoft 365 version of Excel. So once you've checked all of those things, you are pretty much good to go.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
In 2018, Microsoft rolled out a version of Excel with 6 new dynamic array functions and a new calculation engine that allows us to write one formula and get multiple results. And it really is a game changer because it eliminates the need for the CSE method to calculate array formulas. And CSE stands for Control Shift Enter. Being able to write a single formula and getting an array of dynamic results means writing fewer formulas, and that also means fewer errors. And what it generally leads to is more trustworthy spreadsheets. So dynamic arrays make formulas much easier to write, and they solve some really hard problems in Excel. Now, it is worth noting that dynamic arrays and all of the new functions are only available in Excel for Microsoft 365. So if you have a Microsoft 365 subscription, you should have access to these new dynamic arrays, and also in this version of Excel, Excel 2021. And as part of the dynamic array update, Excel now includes 6 new functions which leverage the power of dynamic arrays. And you can see the 6 new dynamic array functions listed out on the slide just here. So we have sequence, which will generate an array of sequential numbers, RANDARRAY, which will generate an array of random numbers, unique, which is one of my favorite new dynamic arrays, which will extract unique values from a list or range. We have a sort function, which will sort a range by column, sort by, which is going to sort a range by another range or another array. And finally, we have the filter function, which will filter data and return matching records. So what we're going to focus on in this section is just going through each of these new dynamic arrays so you understand how they work and how they can be helpful to you. Before we begin, it's important to understand spills and arrays because this is probably going to be new terminology for you. In Excel, formulas that return multiple values will spill these values directly onto the worksheet. Now, that might not make too much sense to you at the moment, so let's take a look at a couple of examples. So I'm going to show you an example of just a regular formula first of all, or a standard formula. So in this first little table, we have some employee names, and what I want to do is I'm just going to return their department from this little table that we have over on the right hand side. So what I could do here is just a very simple VLOOKUP. So we're going to type equals VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is going to be the employee name. We're going to look up that value in this table over here. And you can see that because I've named my table employee location, that's what I'm getting in the formula as opposed to the cell references. I need to provide the column index number. So what information do I want to return? Well, I want to return the department, which is column number 2. And am I doing an approximate or an exact match of the lookup value, the employee name? Well, I'm doing an exact match, so I can put 0 or false on the end here. So I'm just going to go with 0. Let's close the bracket and hit enter, and it pulls back IT as the department. And what I can do here is just drag this down to fill out those other departments for the rest of the employees. Now, this is what we call a standard Excel formula. When we construct it, the answer just appears in one cell. And if we want to copy that to other cells, we have to use our fill handle or other methods in Excel in order to do that. Dynamic array formulas work in a very different way, which you're going to see in a moment. Before we get on to that, let's just take a look at one other type of formula, and that is a CSE array. And this might be something that you're already aware of. The CSE part stands for Control Shift Enter. Because it's always been in Excel, if we want to perform multiple calculations within one formula, we need to press Control-Shift-Enter to make that into an array formula. And this is something that historically many people have found quite confusing. So let's have a look at a CSE array so you can understand exactly what they do if you're not sure. Now in this little table we just have, again, some basic products. We have the quantity that's been sold and we have the price of each of those products. So if I want to find out what the overall total is of all of the products, this would involve two different calculations, because I need to multiply the quantity by the price for the first product, and I need to do that for all of these different products, and then I need to do a sum calculation to add up all of those totals. Now we could do this calculation all in one go using a CSE array. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to say equals sum, and all I would need to do is select all of the quantities multiplied by all of the prices. Now, in order to get this to work and to calculate correctly, we would need to make this a CSE array, which means we need to press Control-Shift-Enter and not just Enter. So let's do that, Control-Shift-Enter, and we get our total. So CSE Control-Shift-Enter allows us to combine multiple calculations in one formula. And another thing with these CSE arrays, you can always tell if you do have a CSE formula, because if you look at the formula bar, you'll notice that your formula is encased in these curly brackets. So that tells you that it's an array formula. Now, bearing in mind both of these examples that we've looked at, this is going to give you a better understanding of how spills work with dynamic arrays. And what I'm going to show you is a very basic example of a filter dynamic array. Now I am going to move through this section fairly quickly, but don't worry if you're not really understanding what I'm doing, because we do have an entire lesson dedicated to this filter function a bit later on. And we'll go through it slowly and we'll break it down. Really what I'm trying to get you to understand in this lesson is just the concept of how spills work. So what we're going to do is we're going to return the employee, the department, and the block from this table depending on what we have selected in column K. So we're going to use one of the new dynamic array formulas, and that is filter. So let's type it in. We need to select our array, which is going to be everything in this table. And then I need to tell Excel what I want to include. So I'm just going to filter for all of the employees in the marketing department. So we're going to select the department array, and that has to equal what we have in cell K4. And that's all I'm going to do. There are lots of other things we can do with filter and lots of other arguments we can use, but just for this basic example, let's close off our bracket and hit enter. Notice the results spill into multiple cells. So I don't just have one formula in one cell like I did when I was doing the VLOOKUP, and this is effectively a CSE array because I'm performing multiple calculations in one formula, and the results have spilled down into multiple cells. If I was to change this department to, let's say, sales and hit enter, those results will update, so everything is fully dynamic. And if we click in our results, notice that we get this blue border around the outside. This is effectively showing us what our spill range is. That is the terminology. And this spill range will expand and contract where necessary when new values are added or removed. So if I was to add another name to the bottom of this table, everything should update. So let's do that. I'm going to go down to the bottom here. Let's just add Adam Lacey, and we're going to put him in sales. And what we should see is that this employees table will update. And there we go, he's added on to the end. Let's put him in the East block, like so. Let's take a look at a couple of other examples of spills. I'm going to jump across to the spills worksheet and notice that we have a little table just here. And that's just listing out some first names and some last names of different employees. Now notice that the first names are in lowercase and the last names are in what we call proper case. Now I want everything in this first name column to be in proper case. And I also want to sort this list of names into alphabetical order A to Z. So the first thing I'm going to do here is put this data into a table, Control T. Let's click on OK. And I'm going to change the colours because those aren't particularly nice. Let's just change those to a purple colour. Now I'm not going to name my table for this example, we'll just leave it on table 2. And let's tidy up this data. So we're going to combine two things here. We're going to use another new dynamic array called SORTBY, and we're also going to make that first name column proper text. So let's type in proper as well. And we're going to select everything that we have in here. Close off our proper. I'm now back into my sort by formula. So I can choose which column I want to sort by. So I want to sort by the last name, comma, and do I want to sort in ascending or descending order? Well, I want to sort in ascending. Close off sort by, hit enter. Now take a look at those results. It's converted that first name into proper case. The results have spilled across both columns, and it's also sorted the list by the last name A to Z. Now, one other thing to notice is if you wanted to go in and edit this formula, if I click in a cell down here within the spill range, note the formula is kind of grayed out in the formula bar. You always must go to the first cell that contains the formula in order to edit it. Then you can double click and you can make your changes. Now, one other thing to note here is if I then wanted to do something like maybe a count on these names, let's type in count A. I'm going to select everything in this table. Notice what Excel does. Take a look at that notation. It's put a pound or a hash symbol in there. And what that basically tells us is that we're referencing a dynamic array. Now, if I was to press enter here, I'm going to get a result of 22 because it's counting each of these individual items. Now, that wouldn't be what I would want in this case. I just want to know how many members of staff we have. So I could go in here and I can do a divided by 2, and that's going to give me the correct result of 11. Now, what about if I was to add more names to this table? And you'll notice at the bottom here, I just have a little list. So let's drag this up. And because our original data is in a table, that table is going to auto-expand to accommodate those new names. But take a look at what's happened just here. We now have a spill error in column D. Now, why do we have that? If we click on it, take a look at the range. If you look at the blue lines around the outside, you can see that because I have another table underneath, there isn't enough room for these results to spill down. So this can easily be fixed simply by moving this table out of the way. So if we pick this up and let's just drag it over here, now I get my spill results. Also notice that my count has updated as well. So everything here is completely dynamic. So that's kind of how spills work. Hopefully you can now understand that and see the difference between just a standard formula, CSV arrays, and dynamic arrays. In this lesson and the next few lessons, we're going to be taking a closer look at the unique function, because this is such an amazing formula for extracting unique values from a range of cells. And this is something which I've always thought should be a lot simpler than it is in Excel. Previous to the release of this new unique dynamic function, it can be quite tricky to get a unique list of values from a range. Now, with the introduction of unique, the process is so much simpler. So let's start out in this lesson by taking a look at a couple of basic examples of how unique works. So in column A, I have a list of countries. And one thing you'll notice about this list of countries is that those entries are not unique. So we have the UK repeated a few times, we have the USA repeated a few times, so on and so forth. So if I just want to extract a unique list of all of the values from the range in column A, I can use the unique dynamic function. So let's click in cell C3. We're going to type in equals and then use unique. So let's start to type this in. Notice it comes up in the list. We can press our tab key to select it, and we have 3 arguments for this particular function. Now notice that the last two are optional because they are in square brackets. And in this first basic example, we're not going to use those optional arguments. We're just going to go for the first one, which is array. So all this basically means is select the range that you want to extract the unique values from. So we're going to select range A3 to A19. Let's close off our unique function, hit enter, and like magic we now have a unique list that is a lot shorter than our original list, because we're just seeing the 9 unique country names. Notice that this is a dynamic function, so we have this blue area around the outside showing me my dynamic array range. Now notice here that I don't have my list of country names in a table. And if we take a look at the unique formula, you can see it's just referencing a standard cell range A3 to A19. Now there are so many advantages to putting your data into a table. For example, if this country list updates, so let's add another country onto the end. We're going to add Brazil and hit enter. Notice that my unique list doesn't update. However, if I put this into a table, then it means that when I change anything in column A, or I add new countries to the bottom, this unique list will also update. So let's put this data into a table. Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. I'm going to leave the formatting as it is. That's absolutely fine. Now, notice this unique list hasn't automatically updated with that new entry for Brazil, as I'm still referencing just the cell range as opposed to the table. So let's construct our unique again. I'm going to delete the formula out. Let's go for equals unique. This time, when I select my range, notice it's going to give me the table name. Now, I didn't rename my table, so it's just called Table 1, and then we have the column heading in those square brackets, so country. I now have Brazil on the bottom, but if I add another country, so let's go for Argentina, hit enter, notice that that now updates. So if you really want to make everything completely dynamic, it's always worth putting your data into a table. Just one of the many advantages of using tables in Excel. Definitely one of my favorite things. Now, another little tip here. This range of cells is essentially a dynamic array. And it might be that you want to use this data in other calculations, or maybe you just don't want to have a formula underneath this list of values. What we can do is we can throw away the underlying formula, so we just have a unique list as plain text effectively. So how do we do that? Well, we do it using paste special. So I'm going to select my unique list, Control C to copy, and if we go up to the Home tab, click the lower half of the paste button, I'm going to choose to paste values only. So when I click this, let's press Escape to deselect. I now just have this as a plain text list. If we take a look in cell C3, I no longer have the unique formula listed there. Now, of course, this means that it's not linked to this table anymore. So if I add any other country names onto the bottom, so let's add Thailand, it's not going to update. But there are many situations where you just might want to use the unique formula to extract the list, but you actually just want to have those plain values. So don't forget about that little paste special trick. Now, the final thing I want to show you in this first lesson is how we can use unique and count together. So maybe I want to count the list of unique entries. So we can combine both functions. So we're going to start out with a count A because we're going to be counting text. And then we want to go straight into our unique formula. Now I could select this unique list, but I'm going to select this one over here in the table. Let's close off unique, close off our count, hit enter, and it's telling me that I have 12 entries, which would be correct because this unique list contains 11 entries. You can see that information down in the status bar. We also added Thailand, which would make it 12. So we can combine unique with many other functions in Excel to make it more useful and get the results that we want. The unique function can essentially do two things. It can extract unique values or it can extract distinct values. So what is the difference between these two? Well, distinct means I want all entries in the source data one time. So for example, if the UK is listed out 3 times in a range, I only want to show it once. So we're getting a list of unique values. Whereas unique means show everything in the source data that appears only one time. So a good example of that in our data would be South Africa. That appears only once in this list, and so that would be included in the results of the unique formula. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, didn't we just use the unique formula to extract a distinct list of values? We extracted all entries from our range of data, regardless of how many times they're listed in the range. Well, yes, we did. But in these examples, we're going to be using more of the unique arguments. So we're going to start with distinct, but first of all, we're going to put our data into a table. Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And I'm going to choose a different table style because I don't particularly like this one. Let's go for a dark one this time. And I'm going to give my table a name. So let's call it country underscore population and hit enter. So now let's extract a distinct list first and then compare it to what we get when we extract a unique list. So we're still using the unique function. We're going to select our array, so we're going to stick with extracting the country names, and notice now, because I've named that table, I have the table name and then the column name, comma. Let's move on to the next argument, which is by column. So do we want to return unique columns or unique rows? Well, I want to return unique rows, so we're going to have false in there, comma. Now this is where we can choose if we're doing distinct or unique. So a true argument will return the items that appear exactly once, whereas a false argument will return every distinct item. So we're doing distinct, so let's type in false, close the bracket, hit enter, and now we get a list of all of those distinct values. Let's compare this list to what happens when we use a different argument. So we're going to do unique again. We're going to select the same range. We want to return unique rows, so we still want a false just here, but this time we want to return items that appear exactly once in the range. So we're going to use true instead. And let's hit enter. So this list is much shorter because it's only returning countries that appear exactly once in the selected range, whereas distinct will show all of the countries regardless of how many times they appear. In the examples that we've looked at so far, we've been using the unique function to extract just one list of values. So we've been extracting a unique list of countries. But in this lesson, I just want to show you how simple it is to extract multiple pieces of criteria using unique. And once again, we can either extract distinct values or unique values. So if we take a look at our table, we have our list of countries, but this time we have some additional information. We have the population of each of those countries in column B, and then the region or the continent that those countries belong to in column C. And what I want to do is I want to extract all 3 of these columns or all 3 of these pieces of information into the table on the right hand side. So once again, the first thing I would probably do here is put this data in a table, Control T. Let's click on OK. And once again, I'm going to change this table style. Let's just change this to something fairly plain. In fact, I don't think I'm going to have any table style this time. Let's name our table. We're going to call this country underscore population underscore region. And let's hit enter. So now if we use unique, we need to select our array. Now, because I want to extract multiple pieces of criteria, I want to extract all 3 columns, my array is going to be all 3 columns. So effectively the entire table. If I only wanted to extract 2 columns, I would just select 2 columns, comma. Do I want to return unique columns or unique rows? Well, I want to return unique rows, so we need a false in here. And this time I want to extract every distinct item. So once again, we're going to add a false. Close the bracket, hit enter, and those results spill down, and it's going to pull through the other pieces of criteria. And of course, because we've put our information into a table, I could add additional countries onto the bottom. So let's add Spain, and it's going to update. So everything is still completely dynamic. Now let's just undo just to get rid of Spain. And once again, you can see that that disappears. Now, if we change this, so I'm going to edit the formula. Remember, you can only edit the formula in that first cell. If I click somewhere else, the formula is grayed out. Let's double click, and we're going to change this last argument from false to true. Press enter, and now we get that much shorter list again because it's only pulling out of this data countries that appear once. And once again, if I was to add Spain onto the bottom, because that does appear only once, it's going to populate in this table. So super simple to use unique and extract multiple pieces of criteria. It doesn't just apply to one column. So far in this section, we've been using the unique function to extract values by row. So in this lesson, I'd just like to show you a couple of examples of how we can extract information by column. So let's take a look at our information first of all. So at the top here, I have a small table, and this table represents some crayon packs. And each crayon pack contains a number of different colored crayons. And we can see here for pack 1, all of the different crayons, and there are 6 in each pack, all of the different colors of those crayons. And we have 8 different packs with different color combinations. And notice the difference here is that our information is running horizontally across the page. So when we're using unique, we want to extract our information by column as opposed to by row. And this pretty much works in exactly the same way as the examples we've seen in the previous lessons. We're just using a different argument. So let's extract the distinct crayon packs first of all. So we're going to type in equals, and then we're going to go with unique, press our tab key. Our array is going to be all of the crayons. And notice I haven't put this in a table, so I'm getting the cell range here instead of a table name. Let's press comma. Now this is where the difference lies. In previous examples, we've been using that false argument to return unique rows. But this time we want to look down the columns. We want it to check each color in the pack to see if that is unique or not. So we want to use the true argument just here, comma, and we want a distinct list. So we're going to do a false argument just here. Close off the bracket, hit enter, and here are our results. Now I'm going to select all of this dynamic range, and let's just move this along just so it's a bit easier to compare with the table above. So the results that we have here are basically packs that are distinct. Now notice it's only brought back effectively 6 packs. So that means that I have 2 packs that are the same in my data. And I can see here that yes, I do. So pack 2 contains these crayons, black, purple, green, yellow, red and blue. And I also have the same combination of coloured crayons in pack 8. So instead of returning this twice, it's just returned it once in my formula results. So that accounts for one of the missing results, but what about the other one? Well, I can see here that pack 1 has this colour combination and pack 4 has exactly the same colour combination. So again, that is why we only have 6 results as opposed to 8. So let's take a look at the final option here. This time we're going to return all of the unique crayon packs. So again, this works in a fairly similar way, equals unique. Our array is going to be our different coloured crayons. This time we're going to return the unique columns. So we want a true argument in here. Now remember, when you're adding these true or false arguments, you can represent true with a 1 and false with a 0. So if I put a 1 in there, it's going to work exactly the same. Now this time I want to return the unique list, so I want to return items that appear exactly once. So this is a true argument as well. I'm going to use a 1 for that also. Let's close off our bracket, hit enter, and now I get an even smaller list. So these are the crayon packs that appear exactly once in this table. So it's basically omitted anything that is a repeat pack. So it's brought back 4 packs of crayons. We have a total of 8, so 4 packs are essentially duplicates. And that would be correct because again, pack 1 and pack 4 are duplicated, as are pack 2 and pack 8. So extremely simple to search with that by column argument as opposed to by row. It's time now to move on to talking about another dynamic array function, and that is sort. So most Excel users are used to sorting lists of data. We can simply click anywhere in our data, and then on the Data tab, we have various different sort options. We can sort A to Z, we can sort Z to A, or if we want to do a more complex sort, we can sort by multiple columns. So bearing that in mind, why is it useful to have a specific function that allows us to sort our data? Well, with a sort function, it means that we're not restricted to keeping our data in one location. We can basically sort it and place that data anywhere on the worksheet. We can also use the sort function with other functions. So maybe we want to extract a unique list of values from a range and then sort that list of values. We can combine them both together because we're using functions. So let's take a look at how a basic sort works. Now, what I have here is a small table of data, and this is very much inspired by the Winter Olympics that are currently on TV. Now, I will say that these are not actual athletes, bib numbers, or medals that they achieved. This is just some dummy data. But that is where my inspiration for this example is coming from. So we have in column A listed out some athletes. We have the country that they're participating for. We have their bib number, and then we have the medal that they achieved. And what I'm going to do first is just a very basic sort. I want to output this information in the table on the right-hand side, but I want to sort the results A to Z by the country. So let's click in cell F4 and type in equals sort. Now notice with the sort function we have 4 arguments, and 3 of those arguments are optional because we have those square brackets. So let's take a look at this in its most basic form. We're just going to use the one mandatory argument first of all, and that is the array. So if I just wanted to do a simple sort on the athlete name, I could select the range, close off the bracket, hit enter, and it's just going to sort those names by the default sort, which is A to Z. Now we want to do something a little bit more complex than this, so let's delete it out. We're going to go back into sort, and we're going to use all of the arguments. Now I want to sort all of the data, so my array is going to be everything that we have in this table. I can then choose the column that I want to sort this data by. And this is kind of similar to VLOOKUP in a way, in that the columns in the table are numbered from left to right. So the athlete column is column number 1, country is column number 2, bib number is 3, medal is 4. So depending on which column you want to sort by, that is the sort index that you would use. So I want to sort this list by country. So my sort index is column number 2. My next argument is the sort order, so if I want to sort in ascending or descending order. Now I want to sort in ascending order, so that is a 1, comma, and our final argument is just, do we want to sort by the column or by the row? Well, I want to sort by the row, so we're going to type in false just here. Close off the bracket, let's hit enter, and now I get those results sorted in ascending order by country. So we have Australia at the top, going all the way down to USA at the bottom. So really nice and simple. And if at this stage I decided that I wanted to maybe sort by a completely different column, maybe I want to sort in descending order by the bib number, I can simply edit the formula. So I'm going to click on this first cell. Let's edit it up in the formula bar. The first argument here is fine, that is just the array. The sort index, well, column number 2, that needs to be changed because we now want to sort by the bib number, so that's going to be column number 3. Now the sort order, if we want to sort in descending order, that is -1. And then we still want the false argument on the end because we're sorting by row. So now if I press enter, all of those are going to update, and you can see that it's now sorted by bib number in descending order. So we have the highest number bib number at the top, all the way down to the lowest. So pretty straightforward. Now let's just go down to this second table that we need to complete. Now notice here it just says sort by country descending order. Nice and easy, we've already done this. So let's do this and see what we get. Our array, again, is going to be everything in this table. Sort index, well, we want to sort by the country, so that is column number 2. Our sort order, well, we want to sort them in descending order, so -1. And we want to sort by row, so we have a false or a 0 argument on the end. Now what happens when I press enter? I'm getting a spill error. And if you remember back to one of our earlier lessons, in general we get this if there isn't enough room for those results to spill down. And I can see that if I click on cell A22, take a look at that blue border, it's kind of overlapping the table that I have underneath. So what I really need to do here to get these to spill properly is move this data out of the way. So let's just grab this and move it. And now all of my results update. And you can see that they're sorted in descending order by country. Now the final example I want to show you here is how we can sort by multiple different columns. So far we've simply been sorting by one column or another. So the first example we sorted by bib number, the second one we sorted by country. But what if I now want to sort the list by country in ascending order and then by bib number in descending order? How do we add in multiple pieces of sort criteria? Well, this is actually pretty straightforward. So let's go back into our sort function. Our array is still going to be the same thing, so we're going to select everything. Now we need to provide our sort index. And because we want to sort by 2 different columns, we want to sort by country and we want to sort by bib number. We need to put these in curly brackets. So we want our first curly bracket and then we specify all of the columns that we want to sort by. So the country column is column number 2, but we also want to sort by the bib number column, which is column number 3. Let's close our curly bracket and then we can specify the sort order for both of these columns. So again, we need a curly bracket. We want to sort by the country column in ascending order. So ascending is 1, and we want to sort by the bib number in descending order, which is -1. Let's close off that curly bracket, comma. Do we want to sort by column or by row? We want to sort by row, so we need a false argument on the end, and we can close off our sort. So let's just review that formula. We're selecting the range that we want to sort. We're then putting inside the first pair of curly brackets the columns that we want to sort by, and then in the second pair of curly brackets we're specifying the sort order for each of those columns. Let's press enter and take a look at our results. So we're sorting by country in ascending, so I should have A to Z, which is correct, and then we're sorting by bib number, and that is in descending order. So if we take a look at Canada's bib numbers, for example, we should find that they go from the highest to the lowest. And of course, with this formula, again, if we take a look at it in the formula bar, if you wanted to sort by 3 or 4 different columns, you could simply add more column numbers and more sort orders in between these curly brackets. So pretty nice and simple to be able to use the sort function and sort by multiple columns. In this example, we're going to use the sort function to sort data horizontally. And in this lesson, in the process of doing this, we're going to be utilizing a couple of other functions that we haven't yet spoken about. So before we begin, let's start out by understanding the data. So here I have a small table. We have some movie names listed in column A, and then we have actors that have been in each of these movies. And I've just listed out 4 actors to keep this data set manageable. Now, what am I aiming to do with this data? Well, what I want to do is effectively find out which actors have been in the same movie together more than once. Now, if I have a list of data that looks like this, it's quite difficult to be able to determine that simply by using our eyes. So we're going to need to use a formula or a couple of different formulas and techniques in Excel to help us out with this. And because there are a few steps, I've listed those out at the bottom. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take this first movie, La La Land, and I can see the 4 actors that we have for that particular movie. I want to take this range of actors and I want to sort the data horizontally in ascending order. So effectively, I should have Emma Stone listed first. So over in this little table, we're going to type in equals, sort, we're going to open our bracket. And this time, the only thing we want to sort is this first row, B4 to E4. Now, do I need to provide a sort index here? Am I sorting on any particular column? No, I'm not. So I don't have to add anything in for my sort index. I can just press another comma to move on to the next argument. Now, do I want to sort these horizontally in ascending or descending order? Well, I want to sort them in ascending order. So we need a 1 just here, comma. Am I sorting by row or am I sorting by column? Well, this time I'm sorting by column. So this needs to be a true argument on the end. Let's close off our bracket, hit enter and see what we get. So now I basically have those 4 actors sorted A to Z. Now what I can do is just select all of these and use my fill handle and drag down, and it's going to apply that same sort to all of the actors in the rest of the movies. And notice that it's sorting by the actor's first name as opposed to their last name. This still isn't the solution to what I'm trying to find out, which is which actors have been in the same movie together more than once. So we need to do a few more things here to achieve our goal. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this horizontally sorted list of actors, and I'm going to basically join the text in each row together. And for this, I'm going to use the text join function. And text join is kind of similar in many ways to something like concatenate or concat as it's now known. It will join pieces of text in different cells together, but we have a few different arguments that we can use. Now, a way that I can do this is to join all of the text together so it's in one cell. I can then sort that data and highlight the duplicate cells. So quite a few different steps there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the sort formula and we're going to join all of these actors' names together so they're effectively all in one cell. And we're going to do that by adding in the text join function. Now, the first argument of text join is to specify a delimiter. So do we want our actors separated with a space or a comma or a dash? Well, I don't want them separated with anything. I just want them in a horizontal list next to each other. So I'm just going to press comma to move on to the next argument. Do I want to ignore empty cells? Well, I don't have any empty cells in my data set, but it's not going to hurt to do a true argument just there. Comma. Now the next argument is text1. Now text1 is going to be generated by the sort. So I can click right at the end here, and I just need to close off my text join. Let's hit enter. And now all I need to do is double click to copy this down. And would you take a look at that? I now essentially have all of the actors together in one cell. So now that I have all this text joined together, I'm going to select it all, Control C, and I'm just going to paste in, and I'm going to use that paste special technique to paste just the values over the top. So now I've essentially thrown away the underlying text join and sort formula. Now that I have my data like this, I can use my regular sorting options on the Data tab, and I'm going to sort it A to Z. Now this makes it quite a bit easier for me to see all of the actors that have been in the same movie. And because we have a fairly short list, I can see that right at the bottom here, those names are all the same, and the same for this one just here. If you wanted to make this really obvious, you could apply some conditional formatting, which will highlight duplicate values. So let's select our data, up to conditional formatting, and we're going to select duplicate values. I'm happy with this fill of light red fill with dark red text. Click on OK, and now I can see the actors that have been in the same movies. So these 4 actors have all been in the movies The Interview and Superbad, and these 4 actors have all been in Burn After Reading and Insurgent. So quite a few steps to get to this place, but this is something that can come in very useful when you're working with real-life data. In the last few lessons, we've been taking a look at how we can use the sort function to sort data in Excel. And now it's time to move on to taking a look at another new dynamic function which is very similar to sort, and that is the SORTBY function. So what exactly is the difference between sort and sort by? Well, if you recall in the sorts that we've done using the sort function, we can either choose to sort in ascending or descending order. Now, sort by differs from this because instead of selecting ascending or descending, we can choose another range or another array to sort by instead. So let's take a look at an example. Now, the dataset I'm using in this example is basically some very well-known books. We have the book title in column A, we have the author of the book in column B, we have the genre that the book falls into in column C, we have when it was first published in column D, and then in columns E to I, we have the number of 1 to 5-star ratings that the book has received. So we're going to use the SORTBY function to sort this data. So let's take a look at SORTBY, let's explore the arguments, and let's take a look at a few different examples. So let's type in equals SORTBY. Now for this one, we have 3 arguments. Now there are actually more arguments than 3. If you take a look at the end there, we have those 3 little dots, which basically tells us that there are more. Now the last argument and all of the ones that we can't see are all optional arguments. The only 2 mandatory arguments are array and by array 1. So array is the data that we want to sort. Now if you take a look just above, I have 2 column headings, book and author. So that is the only information I'm interested in seeing. So my array is simply going to be the book and the author columns, comma. Now I can choose a column to sort this by. So instead of ascending or descending, like we provide when we're doing just a regular sort, this time we can sort by a column. So maybe I want to sort this data by the number of 5-star reviews. So I'm going to choose the 5-star column, comma, and now I can choose how I want to sort this column. So do I want to have the most 5-star reviews at the top or the least 5-star reviews at the top? Well, I'm going to sort this in descending order. So we have a -1. Now, if I was to press comma here, notice that it goes on to by array 2. So we can sort, or we can use this function to sort our range on multiple different columns. Now we're going to do that in a moment. For the time being, let's just keep it simple and just sort by the 5-star column. Let's close off our sort by, hit enter, and now you can see what we get. So at the top here we have Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and if I take a look in my data set, let's take a look at the 5-star reviews. Well, I can see that this one has 1,000 5-star reviews, and a quick look down through the rest of the numbers, that is definitely the highest. So I don't necessarily have to have the value, the number of 5-star reviews, output into this table in order to sort the data by this column. So this makes it very simple for me to see, for example, the top 5 books based on 5-star reviews. Let's do another sort. I'm going to delete this out. I'm going to go into sort by again. Again, the array is just the book and the author because that's the only information that I'm interested in. We can choose what we want to sort by. So maybe this time I want to sort by genre, and I want to sort in ascending order of the genre, comma, and now I want to sort by something else. So maybe I want to see which is the worst performing genre, so which one has the most 1-star reviews. So my second sort is going to be by the 1-star review array, comma, and I'm going to sort this in descending order. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and see what we get. So the first sort we did here was A to Z by genre. So if we take a look at She, A History of Adventure, let's find that in the table. I can see that the genre is adventure. And because that begins with A, it's at the top of the list. The next one is The Catcher in the Rye. And if we find that in the table, it's right at the bottom. That is the coming of age genre, which is C. So I can see that these are going down in A to Z order. But we're then sorting them by 1-star reviews as well. And if we take a look at She, A History of Adventure, I can see that, yes, this has by far the most 1-star reviews. If we take a look at some books that are all by the same author, so for example, Harry Potter, I can see that the Harry Potter book that's received the most 1-star reviews is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. And if we take a look at that, it is this one just here. I can see that yes, this number is greater than all of the other 1-star reviews for the Harry Potter series. So just remember, sort by differs from sort because you're using a column to specify the sort as opposed to just selecting ascending or descending. Much like the sort function, we can also do a horizontal sort by. And we're going to use this method to tidy up this small data set. So if you take a look at this data, notice that these column headings aren't particularly in the correct order. For example, we have the first name in column A, and then we have the title in column B, and their last name in column D. Ideally, we want the title in column A, the first name in column B, and the last name in column C. I then don't really mind if I have department or salary in columns D or E. Now, in order to tidy up this data and sort it so that everything is in the correct order, we need to assign a sort order to each of the columns. And you can simply do this underneath your data set. So what we're going to do here is simply mark the order that we want the columns to appear in. So I want the title column to be first. So we're going to put a number 1 underneath there. I then want the first name. So let's put number 2 just there. That's going to be followed by the last name. So that's a number 3. We're then going to have the department, which is going to be column number 4. And then finally, the salary is going to be column number 5. And we can now use this sort order in our horizontal sort by. So let's click somewhere up here and we're going to do sort by. Press the tab key. What do I want to sort? Well, I want to sort everything in this table. So I'm going to select the entire data set A3 to E16. Remember, if you want to put this in a table, that is absolutely fine. Comma. What do I want to sort it by? Well, I want to sort it by this array just here, comma. How do I want to sort it? Well, I want to sort it in ascending order. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and now you can see like magic, we have all of our columns organized. So now I can go in and add the titles back in. So I'm going to grab title, let's Control C and just paste this across. We want first name, last name, department, and salary. Now notice here in the salary column, we're probably going to want to apply some number formatting. I'm also going to widen out these columns by selecting them all, double-clicking so that we can see everything in each of these cells. The final thing to do is just select the salary column. Let's go up to number, and we're going to give this some currency formatting, and we're going to take those decimal places down. So very, very simple to do a horizontal sort by where you're specifying the order of the columns. It's time now to move on and take a look at our next dynamic array function, and that is the sequence function. Now, what sequence does in its most basic form is it outputs a list of sequential numbers. And you can specify how many rows and how many columns, and also what the step value is of those numbers. Now, before we get into a couple of practical examples of the use of sequence, let's just take a look at it in its most basic, simple form. So if we type in equals sequence, let's take a look at the arguments. So we have 4 arguments and 3 of them are optional. Now we are going to use all of them in this first example. So what we want to specify first of all is how many rows of numbers do we want. So let's say that we want 4 rows of numbers. We can then specify how many columns of numbers we want. So let's say 4 again. I can then specify my starting number. So for argument's sake, let's start at number 1, and then I can provide the step value. So do we want it to step by 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth? Let's start out with 1 so you can understand how this works. Let's close off the function, hit enter, and take a look at what we've got. So we have 4 rows and 4 columns of numbers. The numbers start at 1 and they increase or step by 1 each time. Now, if we double click to edit this formula, let's change some of these numbers. So this time I'm going to say I want 10 rows. We're going to have 8 columns. The starting number is going to be 5, and we're going to step by 10 each time. Let's now hit enter and see what we get. So take a look at this. We're stepping by 10, so 5, 15, 25, so on and so forth. And we have 10 rows and 8 columns. So that's all well and good, but how is this useful when we're working in Excel? Well, let's take a look at a couple of practical examples. So let's delete this out and move to cell D4. So what we have here is a list of training courses in column A. And maybe it's my New Year's resolution that I'm going to complete a different training course every Friday starting on February the 11th, 2022. So what I basically want to list out are all of the training dates, so that is every Friday from this start date, and then I can start assigning what courses I want to attend on those specific training dates. So we can use sequence to help us with this. So let's type in equals sequence. How many rows of numbers do I want? Well, the number of rows is going to be the number of training courses I have in this list. Now, I don't particularly want to go through and count all of these, particularly if my data set was a lot larger than it is. So we're going to get count to do all the hard work for us. Now remember, we need to use count A because we're counting text and not numbers. So let's select all of the training courses, A4 to A17. Close off count A, and now we're back into our sequence formula. We can now specify the number of columns that we want. Now I'm just filling training dates down, so I only want 1 column. I can then choose my starting value. Well, my start date is going to be February the 11th, and because I have that in a cell, I can simply select this cell. What is my step value going to be? Well, I want to complete a different training course every Friday, so that is effectively every 7 days. So my step value is going to be 7. If I was going to complete a training course every 2 weeks, my step value would be 14. So let's stick with 7, close the bracket, hit enter, And now I get a whole bunch of dates. Now, this column isn't formatted as a date column, which is why we're getting these strange numbers. So if we select them and just jump up to number formatting and apply the short date format, you should see that the first date there is February the 11th, but then the next one is February the 18th, which is 7 days after the start date. So you can use sequence not only to produce some numbers, but also to do things like create a date schedule. And there are so many other ways that you can use this sequence function. What I can now do is go through and simply assign which courses I want to attend. So maybe Word is going to be my first course. I can just copy and paste that over. We can also use sequence to unstack records. And this is something that previous to this sequence command was actually quite difficult to do in Excel. Now, what do we mean by unstacking records? Well, again, notice in column A, we have some training courses listed out. And I have these listed vertically. So we have the name of the training course first, then we have the level, we have the location of that training course followed by the date. And it just repeats round. So again, training course, level, location, date, so on and so forth. And effectively, because I don't really like the way that this is laid out, I want to lay them out in this order. So course, level, location, and date. And I want this to be dynamic so that when new training courses are added, everything updates. So in order to do that, we need to put our data into a table. Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And I'm just going to turn off banded rows. So let's click in cell C4 and we're going to jump straight into our sequence function. The first thing we need to specify are how many rows do we want? Well, again, I don't want to be counting down this list, so I'm going to get count A to do all the hard work for me. Let's select everything in this column. Let's close off count A, and now we're back into our sequence formula. The next thing we need to specify are the number of columns. Well, I have 4 columns that I need to populate: course, level, location, and date. So we want 4 columns. Now, for what we're trying to do here, that is all we need. We don't need a start or a step value. So let's close off our formula and see what we get. Let's hit enter, and we get a whole bunch of numbers. Now, each one of these numbers relates to an item in column A. For example, this number 1 relates to the first thing that we have in this list. So this is basically Excel. Number 2 is beginner. Number 3 is the location. And number 4 is the date. So effectively, in this column, we have all of the courses, then we have all of the levels, all of the locations, and all of the dates. Now, I don't have 24 courses because that is how many cells I have highlighted just here. And you can see that down in the status bar if you're not sure. The count is 24. I only have 6 courses in column A. So what we need to do here is edit our formula, and I'm just going to click at the end of the count A, and we need to divide it by 4. So effectively, we're dividing by the number of columns. So divided by 4. Hit enter, and now we have 6 courses, 6 levels, 6 locations, and 6 dates. Now, this still isn't giving us exactly what we want. We don't really want to see these numbers. We want to see the name of the course, the level, the location, and the date. So we can use index to find this out for us. So we're going to type in equals index. So what are we indexing? What's our array? Well, remember, with index, the array is always the information that you want to return. So my array is going to be my list of training courses, comma. What is the row number? Well, the sequence function has provided the row number for us. So I'm going to select cell C4. Now, if I was to close my bracket just here and hit enter, it's just going to return the first one, Excel. Can you remember what symbol we need to add to reference an entire dynamic array? Well, if you said the pound or the hash symbol, you would be correct. So let's click at the end of C4, add a pound symbol. Notice it's selected the entire dynamic array. And now when I hit enter, I get exactly what I'm looking for. The only thing left to do here is change these dates. We need to apply some short date formatting And we've now unstacked those records and they're looking a lot easier to read. And of course, if we change anything here, so maybe this second course changes to a PowerPoint intermediate course, it's going to also update in our results. And if I add more data onto the bottom, so I have some additional data down here, let's just drag it up. It becomes part of this table and our results also update. So you can see we now have those additional items added onto the bottom. And once again, I just need to apply some short date formatting. So you can use the sequence command in many different useful scenarios. The filter function is another brand new dynamic array in Excel 2021 that allows us to filter our data based on criteria that we specify. And we're going to be taking a look at the filter function over the next few lessons because there's lots of different ways that you can use this function. So let's start out in this lesson by understanding simply what the filter function does and how it might be useful. So on the left-hand side, I have a reasonably large table. And this table just shows a list of students. It shows the exam that they took, the grade that they achieved, and also the date of their exam. And what I want to do here is create a few different filters so that I can get a list of the students that match that criteria. So maybe I want to filter for all students that sat a specific exam, so maybe the French exam. Maybe I want to see what exams occurred on a very specific date. Or maybe I want to see all of the students who failed the exam, so I can send out letters inviting them to resit the test. I can do all of this using the filter function. Now, before we get into the actual filter function, we're going to do a couple of things to make our life easier. The first thing we're going to do is, you've probably guessed it, we're going to put our data set into a table. Control T. Yes, my data has headers. Let's click on OK, and let's immediately change that table style because it really is not very nice. And I think I'm just going to choose no table style. I'm also going to give my table a name. So we're going to call this Exam Results and hit Enter. Now the next thing I'm going to do, just to make my life a lot easier, is I'm going to create a data validation drop-down list so I can easily select the exam from a list as opposed to having to type it into cell F4 each time. So we're going to utilize our unique function to get a unique list of all of the exams, and then we're going to use that list in our data validation. So let's click on a cell that's kind of out of the way. We're going to say equals unique. Let's select our list of exams, Control-Shift down arrow, close off the unique function, hit Enter, and now we have a unique list. Now I don't want these to have the unique formula underneath, so let's do Control-C, and our little paste special trick, let's paste the values directly over the top. So now I have this list, I'm going to create a data validation drop-down so I can simply select them from a list. So up to Data, we're going to go into Data Validation. We're going to create ourselves a drop-down list, and the source is going to be this range just here, and click on OK. So now that makes it a lot easier for me to switch between the different exams. Now I'm going to do exactly the same for the dates and also the grades. The process is exactly the same, so I'm going to do that off camera. Join me back here in a couple of seconds and we'll continue on with the filter function. So now I have my 3 data validation drop-down lists. Now one thing I did when I was creating a unique list of the grades, to get them to display A, B, C, D, E and then fail, I combined unique with sort. So I'm going to get you to have a go at that. We've seen how sort works and we've seen how unique works. So see if you can get these to list out in exactly the same way that I have. Now I'm going to leave date and grade blank at the moment and just focus on the exam. So I want to use the filter function to first of all show me all of the students that sat the maths exam. So we're going to type in equals filter. Now, filter has 3 arguments, and the last one is optional. Now, the array, again, the array is the information that we want to return. Now, we want to return student, exam, grade, and date. So we need to select all of our data. Control, Shift, down arrow to select that entire range, comma. Now, this is where we specify our criteria, so what we want to include. What is our filter? Well, our filter is the exam column, maths. So what do we want to include? Well, we want to include the exam column, Control, Shift, down arrow, and that needs to equal whatever we have in cell F4. So at the moment, that is maths, comma. The final argument, which is the optional argument, is if we want to specify some text or something if it doesn't return any results. So in general, I tend to put in quotation marks, no records if it can't find anything. Close the bracket, hit enter, and like magic, we now have a list of all of the students who took the maths exam. Now, once again, column K doesn't have any formatting applied, so let's change this to short date format. So now, if I was to change this to French, that list is also going to change. So it makes it very simple for me to filter those results. Now, currently, we're just filtering by one piece of criteria, and that is the exam that the student sat. But it might be that we want to filter by 2 pieces of criteria, so maybe the exam and the date, or maybe 3 pieces of criteria, the exam, the date, and the grade. It might be that we want to see a list of all of the students that sat the science exam or achieved a grade of A. And this is where we start to build in logic to our filter function. And that's exactly what we're going to explore over the next 4 lessons. We're going to build in logic, and I'm going to show you all of the different operators you can use to really refine your filter results. But in its most basic form, that is how the filter function works. Pretty straightforward. Now, if you're wondering about these columns over here, which have the data that we use to create our data validation dropdown, if you want to hide those, that's perfectly fine. We can right click, select hide, and that just removes them from view. In the previous lesson, we saw how to use the filter function to filter for one piece of criteria. And if you recall, we use the filter function to filter for all students that sat the maths exam. Now, in this lesson, we're going to move that concept on a little bit, and we're going to add in some logic to our filter. And there are many different types of logic that you can add to your filters, and we're going to start out with the plus logic. And all that means is that we're going to be using a plus operator. Now, when we use the filter function with the plus operator, we're basically doing an OR formula. So what does that exactly mean? Well, it might be that I want to filter for all students that sat the maths exam or achieved a grade of C. Or maybe I want to filter for all students that sat the French exam or sat a test on a specific date. So we use the plus operator to separate our criteria, and we're effectively applying OR logic. So let's see how that works. Now I'm just going to switch this filter back to maths for this first example, and we're going to type in equals filter. Now the array argument, as we've already seen, is what we want to return. Now we want to return the student, the exam, the grade, and the date. So our array is pretty much everything that we have in this table. I'm going to highlight that first row and use my shortcut keys, Control, Shift, down arrow to select everything. Now we get to specify what to include. Now, in the previous example, when we were just filtering for students that sat the maths exam, we simply selected the exam column and checked that it was equal to maths. But now we want to add 2 pieces of criteria, because I'm going to filter for all of the students that sat the maths exam or achieved a grade of C. Now, when you have multiple pieces of criteria, you need to encase each piece of criteria in brackets. So let's open a bracket and select what we want to include first. So I want to include all students that sat the maths exam. So we're going to select the exam range, Control-Shift down arrow. And that has to equal whatever we have in cell F4. So that is the first piece of criteria. Let's close the bracket. Now, if we want to do an OR, we then need to add the plus operator, and then we can specify our second piece of criteria. So I'm filtering for all students that sat the maths exam or achieved a grade of C. So my second piece of criteria is going to be the grade range, Control-Shift down arrow, and that needs to equal what we have in cell F12. Close the bracket. Now, if I had more pieces of criteria that I wanted to add to my OR logical formula, I could carry on going. I could add another plus and then specify my next piece of criteria. Now, for this example, we're just going to leave it at 2 pieces of criteria. The only thing left to do here is finish off this filter formula. Now, the last argument here is an optional argument because it's in square brackets. And all we're specifying here is what we want it to return if it doesn't find any results. So in quote marks, we're just going to say no records. And then we're going to close off the filter function. Let's hit enter. Now, the first thing to note here is that column K doesn't have any formatting applied. So let's click the drop down and change this to short date format. So now what we're getting here are all students that sat the maths exam or achieved a grade of C. So we can see here for Ming Xia, he sat the maths exam, this girl sat the maths exam, these two, so on and so forth. But we also have in here any students that achieved a grade C. And of course, if we have these as data validation drop-down lists, we can simply select different pieces of criteria. So now I'm filtering for all the students that sat the French exam or achieved a grade of D. So that is how that plus operator works. You're essentially applying OR logic to the filter function. In the previous lesson, we saw how we could use the filter function to filter data based on logic. And we use the plus operator to do an OR logical filter. So we were filtering for all students that sat the maths exam or achieved a grade of C. So now let's take a look at using the asterisk operator. Because effectively when we use that, we're doing an AND logical formula. So for example, I might want to filter for all students that sat the French exam and achieved a grade of D. And this works pretty much in exactly the same way. We're just changing the operator. So let's jump into cell H4 and type in equals filter. The first thing we need to choose is the array. So we want to return everything, the student, the exam, the grade, and the date. So we need to select all of the information in the table. Remember, Control-Shift down arrow to select everything. Comma. What do we want to include? Well, we're going to include 2 pieces of criteria again, and each piece of criteria needs to go in brackets. So the first thing that we're filtering for are all students that sat the French exam. So we need to select the exam range, Control-Shift down arrow. That needs to equal whatever we have in cell F4. Let's close the bracket. Now we want to apply our asterisk operator because we want to say and then we can specify our second piece of criteria. So our second piece of criteria is the grade. So we want to select the grade range, Control-Shift down arrow, and that needs to equal what we have in cell F12. We can then close the bracket. Now the final thing to specify here is what we want it to display if it doesn't find any records. So again, we're going to say no records and put that in quote marks. We're going to close off our filter, hit enter, and take a look at that. Immediately, I know that we have no students that sat the French exam and achieved a grade of D. So what about if we start changing some of these things? So let's go for grade E. Now I can see 3 students who sat the French exam who achieved the grade of E. What about if I change the exam to maths? We have 1 student who got an E. Now remember, if you want this table to dynamically update, you need to make sure that your original data is in a table itself. Now currently, my data isn't in a table. How can I tell that? Well, when I click inside the data, if we take a look at the ribbons at the top, I don't get my table contextual ribbons. When you're clicked inside a table, you will see a table design ribbon at the top. So let's press Ctrl T and put this data in a table. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And once again, I'm going to change this to no specific format. Now, if I was to go and add a name onto the end here, my filter isn't going to update because I'm currently using a very specific cell range, A4 to D41. So I would need to really redefine my arguments for this particular formula. So let's delete it out, and I'm going to give my table a name. So on the Table Design tab, let's call this, we'll just call it Students. Now, if we then do our filter again, our array is the entire table, and notice now it's picked up the name of the table as opposed to the cell range. Then we specify what we want to include. So let's open our bracket. We're going to select the exam range, and that needs to equal what we have in cell F4. Close the bracket. We're doing an AND, so we want an asterisk in here, and then we can specify our second piece of criteria. So that is going to be the grade, Control Shift down arrow, and that needs to equal whatever we have in cell F12. Let's close off our criteria. Let's specify what we want it to say if it doesn't find any records, and then close off our filter. And if we hit enter, we get the same result. Now the difference here is that if I go and add another student to the end of this table, I should find that my filter formula updates. So I'm going to add another student that sat the maths exam and achieved a grade of E. Currently, we only have 1 result. I would expect this to change as soon as we add somebody else. So I'm just going to add my name to the bottom here. And maths, we want a grade E, and let's just say the 8th, 2022. So if we scroll back up now, you can see that that's automatically added that to my results. So once again, I hope you're taking note of the importance of putting your data into an Excel table if you want everything to dynamically update. In this next example, we're going to take a look at using the filter formula with the equals operator. Now, equals is a little bit different, as it will produce a result that contains either both criteria or neither criteria. So we're going to use a different example here. Now in the table on the left, I have a small little table that I've named venues, and we have a list of 10 or so different venues. So this might be that we're looking to book a venue for an event or maybe a wedding reception or something like that. We can then see the capacity of each venue in column B and if they provide a DJ in column C. And what I want to do here is I want to use the filter function to get a list of venues that have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400 and a DJ, or they have a capacity of less than 400 and no DJ. So let's take a look at how we would construct this. So we're going to type in equals filter. The first argument is our array. So again, this is what do we want to return. Now I want to return the venues, the capacity and the DJ. So I need to select all of the information. And because I've named this table, you can see the table name as opposed to the cell references. Comma. What do we want to include? Well, we have two pieces of criteria. So let's put the first one in brackets And our first piece of criteria is that the capacity is greater than or equal to 400. So we want to select the capacity column, and that needs to be greater than or equal to 400. Let's close off our first piece of criteria. Now we need to use the equals operator and then enter our second piece of criteria. So let's open a bracket. The second piece of criteria is that we have a DJ. So we need to select the DJ column, and this needs to equal yes. And we need to put that in quote marks because it's text. Let's close off our bracket and specify what we want it to say if it returns no records. So this time we're going to say no venues and close off our filter formula. Let's hit enter and see what we get. So what I should be seeing here in my results are all of the venues that have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400 and a DJ. So I can see here Grand Ballroom, that fits, and these two here are both greater than 400 and they also have a DJ. But what I'm also seeing in this list are all of the venues that have a capacity of less than 400 and no DJ. So that is basically these three just here. So it might be that if we have a very large venue, I want them to provide a DJ. But if we have a smaller venue, maybe it's in a small pub or something like that, we don't require a DJ. So this is where that equals operator comes in really useful. And of course, if we put this in a table, if I add another venue onto the end, maybe I'm still scoping out different venues, then our results are going to update. So let's add the Magic Room onto the bottom, and we're going to say that this has a capacity of 500, and yes, it has a DJ. And now you can see that because that meets our criteria of being over 400 and having a DJ, it's adding it to my list of results. So that is the equals operator. It's basically that both criteria are true or neither criteria are true. In the final example of using logic with the filter function, we're going to take a look at the minus operator. And the minus operator works in a similar way, but what we're going to do here is we're going to produce a list of venues that have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400 or a DJ, but not both. And as you would expect, this works in a fairly similar way to all of the other operators that we've been looking at. So we're going to construct our filter function. So let's type in equals filter. Our array, as always, is going to be everything that we want to return. And because I have that in a table, it's coming up with the table name. And then we specify what we want to include. Now, with this example, I'm hard coding greater than or equal to 400 into the formula. Now that in general isn't the best way to put together your worksheets. So maybe once I've put together the invite list, I find that I have more guests than I was expecting. If I want to change this to greater than or equal to 500 or 600, it means I'm going to have to come in and change the formula where I've hard coded that value. So let's lay this out in a different way that kind of adheres more to the rules of good spreadsheet design. So let's delete out filter. And what I'm going to do over here is we're just going to add a heading that says capacity. And we're going to add into here 400. Let's also add another column for the DJ, and I'm going to put in here yes. So now, instead of hard coding these values into the actual filter formula, I can just reference the cell. So if any of this information changes, maybe I change my mind on the capacity or decide that I don't want a DJ, I can simply change it in one cell and everything else is going to update. That's a much better way of working with your spreadsheets. So now let's construct our filter formula. So equals filter, our array is going to be what we want to return, which is everything. comma, what do we want to include? Let's open a bracket for our first piece of criteria. So our first piece of criteria is that the capacity is greater than or equal to, and now we can choose our cell reference, I4. Let's close the bracket to close off our first piece of criteria. Now we're going to use the minus operator, and then we're going to put in our second piece of criteria. And that is that the DJ is equal to yes. So we can select cell J4. Let's close off the bracket. Let's specify what we want it to say if it finds no records. So we're going to say no venues. Close off our filter and hit enter. And would you take a look at that? So this one is a little bit harder to understand, this minus operator. What it's showing us are all of the venues that have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400 or a DJ, but never both. So this first one here, Ritz's, that has a capacity under 400, but it does have a DJ, so it's appearing in our results. The same for this one and the same for this one. Now when we get to these three just here, these venues have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400, but they don't have a DJ. So one of these is true. That's basically what will appear in the search results. One of those conditions needs to be true. But one thing that we don't see is when both conditions are true. So what we won't see in here are any venues that have a capacity of greater than or equal to 400 and a DJ. So that is the difference with this operator. And as I said, if at any point details change, for example, if I change the capacity to greater than 600 and hit enter, you can see that automatically my results update and I haven't had to go in and start messing around with this filter formula. If I change the DJ to no, again, I'm going to get a different set of results. So outputting your criteria into separate cells and using the cell reference is a much better method than hard coding it into the actual formula. Another new dynamic array available in Excel 2021 is the RANDARRAY function. And RANDARRAY allows us to generate or randomize data. So let's take a look at it in its basic form, and then we're going to see how we can apply this in a real-world scenario. So I'm going to click just somewhere on this worksheet, and we're going to type in RANDARRAY. Now notice here that we have 5 different arguments, and all of them are optional. But we're going to use all of these 5 arguments so you understand what each one does. Now, as I said, RANDARRAY will generate a random list of numbers. So the first thing we need to do here is specify how many rows of numbers we want. So I'm going to say that I want 4 rows of random numbers. I can then choose how many columns, so let's go for 4 again. And then if I want to, I can specify a minimum and a maximum value. Now I don't have to utilize minimum and maximum because none of these arguments are mandatory. If I don't specify a min or a max, then Excel is just going to generate some random numbers of its choosing. But maybe I do want to be a little bit more granular about the numbers that I'm generating. So I'm going to say that I want to generate numbers between 5 and let's say 1,000. And the final argument is if I want those numbers to be decimals or integers. So let's take a look at decimals first of all. We're going to use the false argument. Let's close the bracket and hit enter, and that is exactly what I get. Now, of course, if you want to, you can take these decimal places down just by using your number formatting, and there you have your list of random numbers. And this is particularly good if you're just trying to generate some dummy data to use in maybe training videos like this one, or maybe if you just want to practice your Excel skills, it's good to know a few techniques just to get some random or dummy test data into your worksheet. And of course, because this is a RANDARRAY formula, you could throw away the underlying formula and just have the values in the cells by doing Control-C to copy, paste special, and paste those values. So really nice and straightforward. Let's take a look at RANDARRAY again, but this time we're going to use the integer argument. So let's choose RANDARRAY. This time let's do 10 rows and we're going to do 5 columns. The minimum value is going to be 1 and the maximum value is going to be 900. And this time we're going to use the true argument so that we get integers instead. Let's hit enter and there we go. So that final argument really just specifies if you want decimal numbers or if you want integers. So really nice and straightforward. Now that's all well and good, but how can this be useful in practical examples? Well, let's take a look at this first set of data. Now we're going to pretend that we work for a company called Big Drop Bungee. And we have the list of all of the people who are going to be doing a bungee jump today. And we want to assign them to a jump order. So who's going to go first? Because if we were to ask all of these people, they're probably going to look towards everybody else to do the first bungee jump. So we want to assign a random order for these jumpers. And we can use RANDARRAY to help us do that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to type in equals RANDARRAY. Now, how many rows do we want to generate random numbers for? Well, I want to generate random numbers for all of these jumpers. And because my list is fairly short, it would be quite easy for me to count the number of jumpers, but I'm going to get Excel to work this out for me by going straight into a count A. Let's select our list of jumpers, close off our count A, and now we're back into our RANDARRAY formula. Now, I don't actually want to specify a minimum or a maximum, and I'm not going to specify the integer. And if you don't specify what integer you want to use, by default, you're going to get a decimal, which is fine in this case. So let's close this off, hit enter, and this is what we get. Now, notice that one of these looks slightly shorter than the other, and that's just because there is a 0 on the end of this. So just to keep things consistent, I'm going to use my increase decimal button just to make that the same as all of the others. So now that I have this list, I'm going to use my copy and paste trick to throw away the underlying formula. So let's select the numbers, Control C, and then we're going to paste special and paste the values over the top. So now we have these random decimal numbers. I'm going to sort these into order. So let's click in the jump order column, and then on the data tab, I'm going to sort these smallest to largest. So what we could say here is that whoever has the smallest number is going first, and whoever has the largest number is going last. So effectively, we've generated a random jump order for all of these different jumpers. So it looks like Lonnie has drawn the short straw and she's going to be doing her bungee jump first. So that is a very practical use of how you can use RANDARRAY. Now, before we move on from this lesson, I want to show you one more function. Now, technically, this function isn't a dynamic array function, but it is very similar to RANDARRAY, so I thought it would be a good time to introduce it into the course, because we are going to use this quite a bit later on. Now, if we jump across to the next worksheet, I want to show you how you can use RANDBETWEEN. And I will say that RANDBETWEEN is one of my most used functions in Excel. Because of the type of job that I do, I'm always running training sessions, and I need to be able to generate dummy exercise files and practice files with random data. And RANDBETWEEN really helps you do this. So let me show you an example of how it can be useful. So let's just say that these people are employees, and I want to generate a worksheet that shows some random employees, some random salaries, and the dates that they were hired. And I want to use this to maybe showcase sorting and filtering. So instead of going through and just typing in a salary for each of these people very manually, I want to use RANDBETWEEN to generate some random numbers which I can use as salaries. So we're going to type in equals RANDBETWEEN. Now RANDBETWEEN just has two arguments, bottom and top. So you just specify the bottom number and then the top number and the formula will generate random numbers between those two numbers. So let's say the bottom salary is going to be 25,000 and the top salary is going to be 50,000. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now we can double click to copy that down. Let's Control C and then paste just the values over the top. And now all I need to do is apply some currency formatting, and effectively I've very quickly created myself some random salaries. I can also utilize RANDBETWEEN to generate random dates. So let's take a look at this. Now again, we just have these two arguments, but because we're using dates, we want to go straight into the date formula. So now we can specify our bottom date. So let's see, we're doing dates that people have been hired. So we're going to say that everybody was hired between 2005 and 2021. So the bottom date is going to be 2005 for the year. And we'll say the month is January and the day is the 1st of January. Let's close the bracket, comma. We now need to specify our top date. So we go straight into the date formula again. So my top date is, we're not going to have hired anybody after December 31st, 2021. So the year is 2021, the month is 12, and the day is 31. Let's close off the date function, close off RANDBETWEEN, and if we hit enter, we're going to get a number. Let's double click to copy that down, and we need to apply the correct date formatting. So let's jump up to here and select short date, and like magic we've now generated ourselves some random dates between 2005 and 2021. So RANDBETWEEN can be so helpful if you're quickly trying to create data sets to practice with or maybe do some training with. Another great addition to dynamic array functions is the XLOOKUP function. And this is the perfect function for anybody who has ever struggled using index and match to perform lookups. The index and match formula in itself is a reasonably complicated formula, and it can be quite difficult to remember, particularly if you don't use it all that often. With the introduction of XLOOKUP, not only is it more powerful and more flexible, the notation is a lot easier. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of how we can use XLOOKUP. Now in this table on the left-hand side, I have some apps listed out. I have the category that the app belongs to, the app name, the type of app it is, the revenue and the profit. And effectively what I want to be able to do is select an app from the data validation drop-down list and have it return the category, the type, the profit and the revenue. Now normally you would look at using VLOOKUP or something like index and match for this. And in fact, in order to return the first result of the category, you would have to use index and match. Because remember, one of the big limitations of VLOOKUP is that you can't use a lookup value that's to the right of what you're trying to return. So in this case, Google Docs is to the right of the category. So this would need to be an index and match. Now, just so you get a good comparison as to how simple XLOOKUP is, let's do an index match first of all. So we're going to type in equals index, and the first thing we need to select here is the array. Now the array is what you want to return. So in this case, we want to return the category. So we need to select the category column, Control Shift down arrow to select that, comma. We now need to provide the row number. And remember, we can use the match function to help us automate the finding of that row number. Our lookup value is whatever we have in cell H3, and our lookup array is wherever we're going to find that lookup value. So that lookup value exists in the apps list, Control Shift down arrow. The final argument that we have here is the match type. And for this, we want to do an exact match of the app name in the apps list. So we want a 0 argument on the end. We're going to close off match, close off index and hit enter. And that's going to give us our result. So let's just double check this. We need to find Google Docs. Here it is in row 9 and the category is productivity. So that's all working, and if you can remember this formula, that's fine. You can still carry on using index and match. But now let's take a look at how we can do the same thing, but this time using XLOOKUP, because I think you're going to find this a lot easier. So we're going to type in equals XLOOKUP and press the tab key. Now the XLOOKUP function has 6 arguments, and you'll notice that the last 3 are optional arguments because they're in square brackets. So you don't necessarily have to use all of these arguments. The first argument that we need to provide is the lookup value. So that's fairly straightforward. We're looking up whatever we have in cell H3. We then need to provide the lookup array. So where are we going to find that app? Well, we're going to find it in the apps list. Control-Shift down arrow to select that column. The only other thing we need to provide is the return array. So what do we want to return? We want to return the category, so we need to select the category column. Control-Shift down arrow. Now if I wanted to, I could just stop right there. I don't have to go ahead with the final 3 arguments. So if I close my bracket and hit enter, it's going to give me the correct result. So now let's do the same thing, but for the type, we're going to use some of the other arguments. So let's type in equals XLOOKUP. Our lookup value, again, is whatever we have in cell H3, and we're looking it up in the apps list. We then specify the return array, so this time we want to return the type. So we need to select the type column, comma. Now let's take a look at the first optional argument, if not found. So this is where you can specify what you want it to say if it can't match the app in the table. Now if it can't find it, I just want it to say not found, and we need to put this in quote marks. The next optional argument is match mode. So this is the type of match you want to do. So much like the match function, we can choose to do an exact match, but we also have some other options here. We can do an exact match or next smaller item. We can do an exact match or next larger item, or we can do a wildcard character match. So the wildcard character match, that would be relevant if I had, for example, maybe Google Asterisk as my lookup value. So we can do wildcard character matches. And these other 2, where we're looking for an exact match or next smaller or larger item, I'm going to show an example of that in a moment. It's very similar to when you do a VLOOKUP approximate match. Now I want to do an exact match. I want to match the words Google Docs exactly in the table. So the next argument is a 0, comma. Now I can choose how I want to search through this list. So this is something else that you can't really do when you're performing a lookup with index and match. I can choose to search first to last or last to first. And I can even do a binary search. So if I have my items sorted in ascending or descending order, I can specify that here too. Now, if you don't provide any argument just here, the default is searching first to last. So it's going to start at the top of the table and search through the entries, top to bottom. So let's do first to last, close the bracket, hit enter, and now I get the type. Let's double check to make sure that that is correct. I can see yes, the type here for Google Docs is free ads. Let's just finish these off. Let's do the profit. So we're going to do XLOOKUP again. The lookup value is Google Docs, comma, the lookup array is where we're going to find that. That's in the apps list. The return array this time is the profit column, and I'm not going to use those optional arguments. Let's just close this off and hit enter, and we get our result. Let's just do the final one, because practice does indeed make perfect. Lookup value is H3. We're looking it up in the apps list. And we want to return the revenue this time. So we want to select the revenue column. Close the bracket, hit enter, and we get our result. Let's just make sure that we are still all correct. And I can see that yes, everything seems to be working. So now if I change the app that we're looking up in the drop down, everything should update nicely. So XLOOKUP is not only a lot easier in its notation, it's a lot easier to understand and remember, it also allows you to specify a few different pieces of criteria. Let's take a look at another example of XLOOKUP. Because remember, XLOOKUP is part of the dynamic array set of functions, which means that it can spill and return multiple results. So let's take a look at a quick example of that. I have a small employee table just here. We have some employee IDs, some employee names, and their department. And what I want to be able to do is type in the employee ID and have it return the employee name and the department. So we're effectively returning two pieces of information from this table. So we're going to type in equals XLOOKUP. Our lookup value is going to be the employee ID. We're looking it up in the employee ID range, and we want to return the employee name and the department. So when it comes to the return array, we simply just need to select everything that we want to return. I'm going to add a piece of text if it's not found, so we're going to say just not found in here. I want to do an exact match, and I want to search first to last. Close the bracket, hit enter, and take a look at that. If I now change this employee ID to 1005, you can see that everything updates. It looks like Terry's in the same department. Let's choose something else, 1008. There we go. Now, if I was to enter in an employee ID that doesn't exist, so let's say 2000, I'm just going to get that if not found text in the cell. So you can use XLOOKUP to return multiple results because it is a dynamic array formula. Let's take a look at our last example. And this is where we're going to focus on that match mode argument. And this is very similar to how VLOOKUP works when you're doing an approximate match as opposed to an exact match. So what we have over here are some tax rates and some salaries. And what I want to be able to do is type in a salary and get it to return the tax rate. Now, what if the salary that we have in cell D6 doesn't exactly match a salary that we have in the table? So maybe I have in here 30,000. Now I want to apply some formatting to that, so let's just apply some accounting format and take those decimal places down. And I want it to return the tax rate. Now, because we don't have 30,000 listed exactly in this column, I effectively need to do an approximate match. So I want it to return the tax rate that it's nearest to, so I can choose if I want to return the next highest or the next smallest. So let's type in equals XLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the salary. We're looking it up in the salary column. We want to return the tax rate. I'm going to skip over the if not found option because we want to go straight to match mode. So this is where I can choose if I want to do an exact match, or I match it to the next smallest item or the next largest item. Now I can't do an exact match here because 30,000 doesn't exist in the table. So do I effectively want to round it down to the one below or round it up? So I'm going to say I want to do an exact match or next larger item. So that's going to be a 1 argument. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to give me a tax rate of 25%. So if we look at the table just here, it's picked this one out because 30,000, if we were to round it up, the next tax rate would be 25%. If I was to change this to, let's go for 14,000, it's given me a result of 12% because again, it's rounding it up to 15,000 effectively. So that match mode is very similar to VLOOKUP approximate match. The final new dynamic array formula that we're going to look at in this section is XMATCH. And this is like match on steroids, because we can do so much more with XMATCH than we can do with match. So the best thing to do here is just dive in and take a look at a few different examples. Now I have 3 different examples here that we're going to run through, and this first example we just have a very simple list of different applications. And what I want to do is I want to search for the application and return its position in the list, because that's basically what the match function does. It's going to provide you with the row number or wherever the lookup value is located. And what you'll notice about the application that we're looking up is that I'm using a wildcard character just here. So let's take a look at how we would construct this XMatch. So we're going to type in equals, let's choose XMatch, and we have 5 different arguments here. Once again, the last 2 are optional, so we don't need to complete those if we don't want to. Now the first argument is the lookup value. So we're looking up whatever we have in cell C5. Where are we going to look it up? Well, we're going to look it up in this list just here. What type of match do we want to do? Are we doing an exact match of the word GOO asterisk? Do we want to match exactly or to the next smaller item or to the next larger item? Well, it's going to be none of those because we're using a wildcard character. So for this one, we're going to choose number 2. And then finally, we get to specify the search mode. So if we want to search first to last, last to first, or if we've sorted our list in ascending or descending order. So I want to search first to last. So we're going to add a 1 onto the end there, close the bracket, hit enter. And I can see here that using this wildcard character, it's picked out of this list that I'm looking for Google Docs, and it's returned the position of 1. So XMatch shares many similarities with the XLOOKUP function. Let's take a look at another example. Now this time we just have a very small list of employees and we have the monetary value of the sales that they've generated. And what we're going to say here is that any of these sales agents that have generated more than $17,000 in sales are going to get a bonus. And what the XMatch formula will do is it will basically do a count because we're using numeric values, and it's going to tell us how many employees in our list will receive a bonus. So let's type in equals XMatch. Our lookup value is going to be our threshold. Where are we looking this up? Well, we're looking it up in the sales column. Now, what type of match do we want to do here? Well, I don't want to do an exact match because we're not matching exactly 17,000 in that column. What I want to say is that everybody who's achieved greater than that amount of sales is going to get a bonus. So I want to do an exact match or next larger item. So we want a 1 in there. And we're going to search first to last. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And it's telling me that 2 employees have exceeded 17,000 in sales and are going to get a bonus. Now, if I check the table over here, I can see, yes, it's only these 2 people, Adam Lacey and Lucy Jones, who will receive a bonus. Now, the third example here is an example of how you can use index with XMatch. So you're probably more familiar with using index with the match function, but you can expand on that by using XMatch. So let's return the department and the location for the employee that we have in cell G29. So we're going to start out with an index. We need to choose our array. So remember, our array is the information that we want to return. So in this case, that's going to be the department, comma. Next, we need to find the row number. Now, normally, if we were doing just a regular index and match, this is where we would go straight into our match formula. And we're going to do exactly the same thing here, but we're just going to use XMatch instead. We can now specify our lookup value, and our lookup value is the employee. We're looking up the employee name in the employee name range. And now we can choose match mode and search mode. So I want to do an exact match of the employee name, and I want to search through the list first to last. So we want a 1 on the end. Let's close off XMatch, close off index, and hit enter. Let's do that one more time for the location. So we're going to type in equals index. This time we want to return the location, so this is our array. We want to automate the finding of the row number by going straight into XMATCH. Our lookup value is the employee. We want to look that up in the employee range. We want to do an exact match, and we're searching first to last. So we have a few more additional pieces of information that we can add into our formula when we're using XMatch as opposed to match. Let's close off both of our formulas, hit enter, and let's double check our results. So Adam Lacey, he's in the marketing department and he's located in the West block. If I was to change this to, let's say, Ming Sia and hit enter, all of those details update. So XMatch is pretty much the same as match. It will return the position of a lookup value, and you can combine it with index to perform a powerful and complex lookup. It's time now to complete exercise 2. And in this exercise, I'd like you to practice some of the skills that you've learnt in this section related to dynamic array functions. Now, notice at the bottom, we have 4 different worksheets that I want you to work through. We're going to start out on the first worksheet where we're going to practice using the unique function. So the first thing I'd like you to do is extract a list of unique months into column G. I'd then like you to extract a list of distinct months into column H. And then finally, I'd like you to count the number of unique months. Once you've done that, you can click over to the Filter and Sort worksheet. Now for this exercise, I'd like you to first create a data validation drop-down list containing unique values for the sales agent and unique values for the month. And what I'd then like you to do is use the filter function and create a filter that filters for the sales agent Ben. And I'd like you to ensure that the text "No records" is displayed for 0 results. Once you've done that and it's working, I'd like you to then modify the formula to filter for sales agent Ben and the month of February. And once you have those results, I'd then like you to modify the formula again to filter for sales agent Ben or the month of February, which should give you a longer list. Once you have that longer list of results, I'd then like you to modify the formula and sort the results in ascending order by sales agent. And I'd like you to use the sort function as opposed to sorting utilities on the home or data ribbons. And then a final thing I'd like you to do is enter the total profit generated by Claire for the month of March, and I'd like you just to input that into cell P4. Once you've completed that, it's time to move on to the XLOOKUP worksheet. Now for this exercise, once again, I'd like you to create a data validation drop-down list in cell I4 containing the unique values for the sales agents. And then I'd like you to construct an XLOOKUP formula to return the team, the revenue, and the profit for whichever sales agent is selected in cell I4. And then the final part of this exercise is practicing the RANDARRAY function. So I'd like you to use RANDARRAY to add some dummy data into columns B and C for revenue and profit. And I'd like you to use the COUNTA function to work out the number of rows required. I'd like you to use 100 as the minimum value and 1000 as the maximum value, and output the values as integers, not decimals. Once you've done that, I'd like you to use paste values to just throw away the underlying formulas. So quite a bit of work to do in this exercise. Have a go at it, and if you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing we need to do here is extract a list of unique months into column G. So this is fairly straightforward. We're just going to select the unique function. Our array is going to be the list of months, and that is it. Close the bracket, hit enter, and that is our unique list. Now remember, distinct is slightly different because that will return only the months that appear exactly once. So we're going to go for unique again. We still want to extract the months, We want to return the unique rows, so we need a false in here, but we want to return items that appear exactly once. So we're going to add a true on the end here and hit enter. And then finally, I asked you to count the number of unique months. So because we're counting text, we need to use count A. We can then go into unique and we can select our months, close off unique, close off count A, hit enter, and the result there is 7, which should basically be the same as the number of values returned in column G. And if we take a look down the status bar, you can see that the count is in fact 7. Let's jump across to the next worksheet. Now this is where we get to practice the filter and the sort functions. And the first thing I asked you to do was to create a data validation drop-down list containing unique values for the sales agent and months. So the first thing I'm going to do is just somewhere down here is I'm going to use unique again to get a unique list of the sales agents and also a unique list of the months. So now I can use these to create my data validation drop-downs. So in cell G5, let's jump up to data, into data validation. We want to create a list and our source is going to be these values just here. We need to do exactly the same for the month, so up to data validation. We want to create a list and our source are our unique months. So let's make a couple of selections. The next thing I asked you to do was to create a filter to filter for sales agent Ben and ensure that the text no records is displayed if there are no results. So we want to come over here and put together our first filter. Now we want to return everything, so our array is going to be everything in this table. We now need to specify what we want to include. Now we're only including sales agent Ben, so we only have one piece of criteria. So we're going to include the sales agent when it's equal to what we have in cell G5. And in a moment, I'm going to switch this to say Ben, comma. What do we want it to say if it doesn't find any records? Well, we want it to say no records. Let's close our filter and hit enter. At the moment, we're seeing the results for Claire, but we need to switch this to Ben, and there we go. This time we want to modify the formula to filter for sales agent Ben and the month of February. So let's switch our month to February and let's edit our formula. Now I'm going to edit this up in the formula bar. So if we delete out what we have there and just take it back, we've selected our range. Now we need to specify what we want to include. Now remember, if you have more than one piece of criteria, they need to go in brackets. So our first piece of criteria is that the sales agent needs to equal Ben. Let's close the bracket. And if we're doing an AND filter, we need to add the multiplication symbol, because our second piece of criteria is that the month is equal to February. Let's close the bracket. We want it to say no records. If it doesn't find anything, let's close and hit enter. And now we get two results for sales agent Ben in the month of February. Next, I wanted you to modify the formula to filter for sales agent Ben or February. So this is where we're changing that operator. So let's go back up to our formula, and instead of an asterisk in here, we just need to switch this out for a plus instead. So now we're getting a slightly longer list of results because we're filtering for sales agent Ben or the month of February. Then I asked you to modify the formula and sort the results in ascending order by sales agent. So once again, let's jump up to the formula bar and we're just going to add sort onto the front. The array is generated by the filter formula. Let's go to the end. Our sort index, well, we want to sort by the sales agent, which is column number 1. And we want to sort in ascending order, so we need another 1 on here. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and we get our new list of sorted results. The final thing I asked you to do was to enter the total profit generated by Claire for the month of March in cell P4. So let's switch our filter to Claire, and we're going to change our formula. So this time we're going to say filter. We want to select everything. We have two pieces of criteria. The first piece is that we want to filter for sales agent Claire. So sales agent must equal Claire. And so we need an asterisk in there. We want to filter for the month of March. So let's select month. That needs to equal what we have in cell G8. And again, I'm going to change this to March in a moment. Let's close the bracket. Let's add our text for no records. Close the bracket again and hit enter. Now let's make sure that we switch this to March, because the final thing we needed to do was enter the total profit for Claire in cell P4. So this is a very straightforward sum calculation. Let's just type it in. We're looking for the total profit, so let's select both of those cells, hit enter, and there we go, 555. Let's move on to the next part of this exercise. The first thing we need to do here is create a data validation drop-down list containing unique values for the sales agents. Now, all of these sales agents are unique, which makes this a little bit simpler. We can go up to data validation. We don't need to do unique first of all. We're going to create a list, and our source is going to be this range just here. Let's click on OK. And I'm just going to select a sales agent from here, because now we want to use an XLOOKUP formula to return the team, the revenue, and the profit. So let's type in XLOOKUP. Our lookup value is whatever we have in cell I4. Our lookup array, well, our lookup array is the sales agent range. And our return array is going to be the team. Close the bracket, hit enter, and that gives us our result. We're going to do exactly the same to lookup, the revenue, and the profit. So our lookup value is I4. We're looking it up in the sales agent column, and this time we're returning the revenue. Close the bracket, hit enter. And finally, we need to do the same for the profit. Lookup value is I4. We're looking that up in the sales agent range, and this time we're returning the profit. Close the bracket, hit enter, and there we go. And we should find that when we select somebody else from this list, everything updates. The final part of this exercise was to practice using the RANDARRAY function to add some dummy data into columns B and C. So let's click in cell B5 and type in RANDARRAY. Now the first argument here is how many rows of numbers do we want? Well, I want the number of rows to be equal to the number of sales agents. So I'm going to use the COUNTA function to work out how many rows I have. How many columns of numbers do I want? Well, I want to fill revenue and profit, which is 2 columns. I want the minimum value to be 100, the maximum value to be 1,000, and I want to show these as integers as opposed to decimals. So we need a true argument on the end. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and like magic, I get my dummy data. The final part of this exercise was just to throw away the underlying RANDARRAY formula so that these are just values. So let's select them all, Control C to copy. Let's go to the Home tab, and we can just paste special, paste values. And that is it. So quite a long exercise for this section. I hope you got on okay with that, and I will see you in the next exercise. In this section of the course, we're going to take a look at some more advanced lookup and reference functions. And we're going to start out in this lesson by taking a look at how we can perform two-way lookups. And I'm going to show you two different methods. We're going to use index and match first of all, and then I'm going to show you how you could do the same thing but using the new XLOOKUP function. Now, what exactly do we mean by a two-way lookup? Well, effectively, what we want to do is we want to look up information using two pieces of criteria as opposed to one. Now, if we take a look at the table that we have on the worksheet, this basically just lists out a few different travel companies. We then have the months, January to December, listed across the top. And then in the middle here, the main bulk of our data is some sales figures that each of these companies have generated by month. And what I'm aiming to do is I want to be able to select a month and a company and have it return the sales figure. So we're doing a two-way lookup because we need to use two lookup values. We need to look up the month and then we need to look up the company to get our result. Now, before we get into constructing the formulas, there's some prep work that we need to do here. And all of this prep work is really just to make your life a lot simpler and easier. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is put my data into a good old Excel table, Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And immediately I'm going to change that to no particular format. Let's give this table a name. So let's call this travel underscore data. Now, one thing I don't really need here are these filter buttons in the column heading. So if we go up to table design, we can simply deselect filter button to get rid of those. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create two data validation drop-down lists so I can simply select the month and the company. I don't really want to spend time typing each one in to get my result. Now, what I've found in the past is that if I create a data validation drop-down list and I use this range running horizontally across the page, it doesn't tend to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to output January to December, and I'm going to flip them around so we have them in a vertical list, and then I'm going to use that list for my data validation. Now, a quick way of just flipping around data is to use the transpose function. Now, this is something you may have used in Paste Special previously, but there is also a function to do the same thing. And all we need to do is select our range, press enter, and it's going to give us a vertical output. Now, I want to throw away the underlying formulas, so Control C, and then we're going to Paste Special and paste the values. So now that I have this list, I'm going to create a data validation dropdown. So up to data, into data validation, we want to create a list, and our source is going to be this over here, and click on OK. So now I have all of those values listed in a drop-down. We're going to do the same for the companies. Now, I have these in a vertical list already, so this is straightforward. Data validation. We're going to create a list, and our source is just going to be these values here, and click on OK. Now, the final step of preparing this data that I'm going to do is I'm going to create some named ranges to make our formula a lot simpler to understand. So I'm going to create a named range for the company's range, for the months, and also for the data. So let's start out with the months. I'm going to select all of those cells, and then in the name box, we're just going to call this months. Let's select the companies. We're going to call this companies. And then let's select our data set. And we're just going to call this data. So now let's go in and let's build our first two-way lookup. And the first method I'm going to use is index and match. So let's type in equals index. The first thing we need to choose is our array. Now remember, the array is where we're going to find our answer. So our answer is going to be somewhere within these numbers. Now, instead of selecting the cell range, because I've named my ranges, I can simply press the F3 key, and that's going to show me all of the ranges that I have in my workbook. So I can choose the data range. We need to automate the finding of the row number using match. What is our lookup value? Well, we have two different lookup values. We need to look up the month, but we also need to look up the company. So let's deal with the month first of all. My lookup value is going to be B13. Where am I going to look that up? Well, I want to look it up in this month range at the top. Now again, because we named that range, we can simply press the F3 key and select the months range. comma. We want to do an exact match of that month name in that range. So we want a 0 on the end there. Let's close off our first match. Now, because this is a two-way lookup, we need to go straight into another match. And this time we're going to look up the company. So our lookup value is A14. Where are we looking it up? Well, if we press F3, we're looking it up in the company's range. And we're doing an exact match. Let's close off our match, close off our index, and then when we hit enter, we should find we get the correct result. So let's double check. We're looking at May, sun and sales, which is this value just here. And I can see that, yes, that is the same. Let's select something else. Let's go for January and go explore. There we go. That's exactly right. So a few steps there to achieve a really nice two-way lookup. Now that is the method using index and match. But of course we can do exactly the same thing using the new XLOOKUP function. So let me show you how this works. Let's delete it out. We're going to type in equals XLOOKUP. So what is our lookup value? Again, we have two different lookup values. Let's deal with the months first of all. We're looking up January. Where are we looking it up? Well, we can press that F3 key. We want to look it up in the months, comma. The next argument is the return array. Now, when we're using XLOOKUP, we specify the return array last. So we want to go straight into our next XLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the company, and we're looking that up in the company's range, F3, companies, comma. Now we can specify what our return array is. So our return array is going to be those numbers. F3, let's select the data, and I could carry on going. So if I want to specify a value, if it's not found, a match mode, a search mode, I can definitely do that. So let's do that. I'm going to add in not found if it can't find what I'm looking for. The match mode is going to be exact, and we're going to search first to last. Let's close off both of our XLOOKUPs and hit enter. And now take a look at what we get. That looks good so far. If we switch to April and let's say footsteps, I'm getting the correct value. The choose function in Excel returns a value from a list using its given position or index. And choose can be useful in many different scenarios, and its power increases when it's combined with other functions. So let's take a look at choose in its most basic form first of all. So what I could do here, if I just click in a random cell somewhere on the worksheet, if we type in equals choose, notice we have 3 arguments just here. Now there are actually more than 3 arguments again because we have those 3 dots at the end. Now the first argument is the index number. Now I'm going to type in a 2 here. This won't make too much sense to you at the moment, but just bear with me because it will all become clear. Comma. Value number 1. Now I'm going to enter in 3 values. We're just going to use colors. So let's go for red as our value 1. We're going to say blue is our value 2 and green is our value 3. Now if I press enter, what result do you think I'm going to get here? It's going to return blue. And that's because it's using this index number here, the number 2, to pick the second item that I have listed out. If I was to change this index number to 1, I'm going to get red. And as you would expect, if I change this to 3, I'm going to get green. I could even do this using cell references instead. So if I have red, blue, and green listed out in cells, I could say equals choose. Index number, let's say 3 this time. And instead of typing the values out, I can use the cell references. So we have value 1. I'm going to lock that cell reference, value 2, and finally value 3. Close the bracket, hit enter, and because we're selecting the third item, it's returning the word green. So choose can help you choose a value based on an index or a position number. Now that's all well and good, but how can this be useful? Well, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Now, if we take a look at this first table, we just have some employee names and we have a code next to them. And we need to complete the department for each of these employees. Then over on the right hand side, we have the code, and then we have the department that that code relates to. So effectively, what I want to do is I want it to look at the code, I want it to match it over here and return the corresponding department. Now we could use a VLOOKUP to do this. So let's do that first of all, and then I'll show you why there is an advantage to using choose instead. So I could do equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value is going to be the code. The table array is this over here, F4 to G7, and we need to make sure that we lock that. The column index number, so what do we want to return? We want to return the department, which is column number 2. And we're going to do an exact match, which is a false argument. Hit enter, and then I can copy that formula down. And that's going to give me the correct result. Everything corresponds to this little table. However, what happens to this formula if I was to delete this table over here? Well, if I delete it out, I suddenly get NA errors because this VLOOKUP doesn't have anything to refer to. So this is where choose has an advantage, because we're actually specifying all of our arguments within one function when we're not referring to an external table or external data. So let's undo, and we're going to do this again, but this time we're going to use choose. So let's type in equals choose. Our index number is going to be the code, and then we can specify our values. So I could type directly into here, sales, then we have HR, then marketing, and then finally we have finance. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and then when I copy this down, it's giving me exactly the same results as the VLOOKUP, but if I was to delete this data over here, it's not going to affect the choose formula because we're referring to the different departments directly within the formula. Now, of course, if we were to use cell references in the choose formula for sales, HR, marketing, and finance, instead of actually typing out the words, we're going to have the same situation as we do with the VLOOKUP. Because the formula would be referring to cells over here, if we were to delete this data, then that's going to give us some errors in our formulas. But we can use choose in a similar way to VLOOKUP, and then it doesn't matter if we delete the data or not. Now, another way that you can use choose, and this is something, again, that I do frequently, and this is particularly useful if you want to create some data that you can just use for training or practicing Excel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these departments, Control C, let's just paste those. I'm going to paste them all the way over here because this formula can get quite long. Now I'm going to add a few more departments onto the end here. So let's say projects, development, and IT. Now it might be that for this list of employees, I want to assign a random department to them. I can use a combination of choose and RANDBETWEEN to do that. So we can type in equals, let's go for choose, and this time we're going to go straight into RANDBETWEEN. Now remember, with this formula we need to define a bottom and a top number. And RANDBETWEEN will generate random numbers between those two numbers. So my bottom number is going to be 1, and my top number is basically going to be the count of the number of different departments that I have. Now I only have a short list. I could type in 7, or I can get Excel to do the hard work for me by using account A, selecting the range, and we need to lock that range if we're going to copy this formula down. So we can close off our count A, close off our RANDBETWEEN, and now we're back into our choose formula. So now I can specify my different values. So my first value is cell J23. Let's lock that. The next one is HR. Then we have marketing. Next is finance, projects, development, and finally we have IT. Let's close off our choose formula. If we hit enter, we can then copy this down And we're basically getting this list of departments, but in a random order. And the way that this function works is RANDBETWEEN is basically assigning a number between 1 and 7 randomly to each of these names, and then that number is being used to reference one of these departments, 1 to 7. And of course, if you want to throw away the underlying formulas, you can Control-C and paste values over the top. So this is something I use all the time when I'm generating random data sets for practice purposes. Now let's look at our final example of using choose. Now here I have a list of dates. And what I basically want to do is I want Excel to look at the date in column A, and I want it to tell me what quarter this date falls into. Now there are a couple of different ways that you could do this. We could do this using the ROUNDUP function. So if we type in round up, we're then going to go straight into the month function. Let's select the month, and then we want to divide it by 3, which is going to give us the quarters. The final thing to specify is the number of digits. Now I don't want any digits on the end, so let's close the bracket, hit enter, and then if I copy this formula down, it's going to tell me that these ones are all part of quarter 1, these ones are quarter 2, these are quarter 3, so on and so forth. Now another way that you could do this is by using choose. So let's type in equals choose. Then we want to go straight into the month function again, and our serial number is going to be the date. Now we can specify our values. So the way that this works is that the first quarter is made up of 3 months, so January, February, March. The second quarter is made up of April, May, June, so on and so forth throughout the year. So we're going to assign a value to each of the months. So January is 1, so's February, so's March. We then have April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So we're assigning a value to each of those months. Hit enter, and we should find that we get exactly the same thing. Now, some people find this choose formula easier to remember than this round up formula. And I will leave that down to you to determine which one you want to use. But I just wanted to showcase there a few examples of how you can use choose in real life scenarios. The switch function is very similar to the choose function and can be a good replacement for something like VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at an example of how you can use switch. Now, what we have here in column D are some movies listed out. In column E, we have a ratings column, which is currently blank. And then in column F, we have the IMDb score for that movie. And what I effectively want to do here is complete the ratings column using the IMDb score. And if we take a look over on the left-hand side, we have a little table here that shows the rating and the score that's attributed to that rating. Now, of course, this is a scenario that is kind of perfect for some kind of lookup function like VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP. And it's worth noting that the switch function, despite the fact that it is really a lookup function, you're not going to find it under the lookup and reference group of functions in the functions library. You'll actually find switch underneath logical. Now, before we get on to working with switch, let's take a look at how we would do this if we were using XLOOKUP. And then we can do a good comparison between the two. So we're going to type in XLOOKUP. Now the lookup value is going to be the IMDb score, comma. Where are we looking this up? What is our lookup array? Well, our lookup array is going to be wherever we're going to find this score. So this is our lookup array, B3 to B7. Now we're going to copy this formula down, so we don't want those cells moving, so F4 to lock. What is our return array? Well, we want to return the rating. So we need to select A3 to A7, F4 to lock, and then we close off our XLOOKUP. Let's hit enter. Let's copy this down and we get exactly what we're looking for. Now, of course, the disadvantage with this again is if we were to delete this table or delete the values out, we're going to get NA errors in column E. So one advantage that the switch function and the choose function also have is that we don't necessarily have to have what we're looking up in a table or a list, because we define our values from within the formula. So let's do the same thing, but this time we're going to use switch. So Control-Shift down, just delete out everything that we have in there, and this time we're going to use switch. Our first argument is the expression. So this is basically, what are you looking up? So I want to look up the score, comma. Now I get to define the different values. So the first value I need to define is a score of 9. If it finds a score of 9, it's going to return the word excellent. If it finds a score of 8, it's going to return the words very good. 7 is going to be good. 6 is okay. And finally, 5 is poor. And close the bracket. So now if I hit enter and copy this formula down, it's going to produce exactly the same result as the XLOOKUP. The only difference here is that if this data gets deleted out of this table, it has absolutely no effect on the values in column E, because we're defining our values that we're using as opposed to referring to them via cell references in an external table or some kind of list elsewhere on the worksheet. So that is the advantage that switch, and to a lesser extent choose, have over XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP. So you might find there are certain scenarios where switch is going to be extremely useful to you, particularly if you don't want big long lists of data or tables of data on your worksheet. You just want the results. It's time now to do exercise 3. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section. So the first thing I'd like you to do in this exercise is practice two-way XLOOKUPs. So I'd like you to replace the words month in cell K4 and team in cell A3 with data validation drop-down lists that contain the months and also the teams. I'd then like you in cell L4 to add a two-way XLOOKUP formula to look up the month and the team and return the sales total. And then I'd like you to test this formula is working by checking that your results are correct by finding them in the table. Once you've done that, it's time to move on to the next part of this exercise. And in this exercise, we're going to practice using choose and RANDBETWEEN. So I have a list of team members just here, and what I want to do is assign them to a team based on colours. And I want the colour assignment to be random for each of the team members. So I'd like you to combine the choose and the RANDBETWEEN functions to assign team members randomly to a team based on the colours that we have listed just here. And then in the final part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice using the switch function. So I'd like you to use the switch function to search in this table up here for the job ratings for each employees, but instead of the job rating, I'd like you to return the grade that's attributed to each of the job ratings. And I'd like you to use the switch function here as opposed to the probably slightly easier option of using a lookup function. So quite a few things to do there. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So in the first part of this exercise, I asked you to replace the words month and team with data validation drop-down lists. So let's get rid of the word month and do our first drop-down. So into data validation, we're going to choose list, and we need a list of the months. So our source is going to be A4 to A15. That looks perfect. We're going to do exactly the same for team. Let's go into data validation. We want to create a list, but this time our source are the teams just here. Let's click the drop down. Looking good. Now that we have these two drop downs, I want to create a two-way XLOOKUP formula that's going to find the value in this table based on my selections in the drop down lists. So we're going to type in equals XLOOKUP. So our first lookup value is going to be the month, comma. Where are we looking it up? Well, we're looking it up in the month array, comma. Now we need to go into our second XLOOKUP. This time we're looking up the team. We're looking this up in the team array. What do we want to return? Well, our result could be anywhere in our table, so we need to select all of the values. Let's close off the first XLOOKUP, close off the second, and hit enter. And now we get our result. Let's just apply a little bit of accounting format and take those decimal places down, and let's check that our result is correct. So if we take a look at March, Team 4, this is the answer, 3254, and that's exactly what we have. If we change the month to, let's go for January, and we'll say Team 2, let's check that in the table. That should be our result, which it is. So once you've completed that part of the exercise, let's move on to the choose worksheet. Now for this, I asked you to use the choose and RANDBETWEEN functions to assign team members randomly to a team based on color. So in here, what we want to do is we want to type in equals choose, and then we want to generate some random numbers. So we're going to go straight into RANDBETWEEN. Now the random numbers that we want to generate are going to correspond to these colors in the list. So what is the bottom random number that we want to generate? Well, it's going to be number 1. What is the top? Well, I have 4 items, so the top number is going to be 4. Now I'm back into my choose function, and I can assign meaning to the random numbers that I'm generating by assigning them to colors. So whenever we get a number 1 generated, it's going to output red, and we're going to lock this because we want to copy it down. Whenever there's number 2, we're going to get the next color. Whenever there's a number 3, we're going to get green, and whenever there's number 4, we're going to get white. Let's close off choose, hit enter, and now if we double click to copy this down, we have a bunch of random colors generated for each team member. The final part of this exercise was to use the switch function to search in the table for the job rating and return the corresponding grade. So we have the job ratings up here, and we have exactly what those job ratings mean. So excellent, very good, okay, or poor. And in the table below, I have a list of employees, the job rating that they've achieved, but I want to return the grade. Now, of course, we could do this using some kind of lookup function, but I wanted you to use the switch function. So let's type in equals switch. Our expression, so what are we evaluating here? We're evaluating the value in cell B12. What is our value? Well, if the value in cell B12 is 1, then we want it to output the word excellent. If the value is 2, we want the word very good. If the value is 3, then we want it to say okay. And if the value is 4, we want it to say poor. Close off the bracket. Let's hit enter. That looks good so far. Double click to copy down, and there we have our results. Remember, the main advantage of doing it this way over lookups is that I could now freely delete out this table at the top, and it's not going to affect my formula. So that's the end of this exercise. I hope you got an okay with that. I will see you in the next one. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can use median and mode. And both median and mode are statistical functions. And if you're looking for them on the formulas ribbon, you're not going to see statistical functions listed out here. You're going to need to click on more functions. and you'll find a group called statistical, and both of them are in here. If we scroll down to the M section, we have median and we have mode. Now, one thing to note here is that we have two mode functions, mode.mult and mode.single. In previous versions of Excel, and I'm talking pretty old versions of Excel, sort of pre-2010, we only had a mode function. And mode definitely had its limitations, which meant that Microsoft implemented two new functions, mode.mult and mode.single. I'm going to take a look at both of these so you understand the difference. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the average. And we're going to use this little table over here, which basically registers the steps per day of a particular person. So in general, they do between 5,000 and 6,000 steps per day over roughly a month and a half. So if I want to find what the average number of steps per day for this person were, and remember an average is also known as the mean, we can simply use our average function. We should all be very familiar with this. We can simply select our data, A3 to E12, close off the bracket, and we can see that the average number of steps per day is 5,617. Now, the median is similar to average, but it finds the middle value in the list. And a lot of the time you'll find that the median value is different to the average value. Remember, with an average, Excel will basically add up all the numbers and divide it by the number of values to get the average, whereas median will effectively sort all the numbers into order and find the middle value. So let's take a look at the median for this data set. So we're going to click in cell H3, type in equals median, and we're just going to select our data range, close the bracket, hit enter, and we have a completely different number. Now, this number is also affected by whether you have an odd number of values or an even number of values. If you have an odd number of values, then Excel will take the middle value, whereas if you have an even number of values, it will take the two middle values and average them to get the median. So that's how it calculates this number. Now let's move on to mode. Now, if we type in equals mode, notice that we have three functions in this list: mode multi, mode single, and then we have mode. And what you'll notice about mode is that we have this little warning triangle next to it, and that basically means that this is the compatibility version of mode. So this is a formula that's available in older versions of Excel, so Excel 2010 or previous. Mode has since been replaced in later versions of Excel with the two functions that you can see above. And both of these do slightly different things. It is worth noting, though, that if you do use the two new functions in your spreadsheet and you send this spreadsheet to somebody using a very old version of Excel, they might not be able to see these calculations because these two functions won't be available to them in their version. Now, hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. There aren't that many people these days who are still using Excel 2010 or Excel 2007, but it's definitely something to be aware of. So let's take a look at mode single first of all. Now, mode single works pretty much the same as the old mode function. And what mode single will do is it will look through our data and it will produce a result, or it will tell us which one of these values occurs most frequently. So I have quite a few values in this data set that repeat. So I want to find out which one occurs most often. So we're just going to select our data set one more time. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And I can see that 5713 occurs the most. Now I'm just going to check that by applying some conditional formatting. And I'm just going to highlight the cells that match 5713. And I can see that I have 4 occurrences of this value. Now there are other numbers that occur multiple times in this data set. And if I highlight all of the duplicates, you can see all of the numbers which occur more than once. And this is pretty much what mode multiple does. It will find the value that occurs the most, so in this case it's going to be 5713. We know that this occurs 4 times, but mode multiple will also show us all of the other values that also occur 4 times. And this is something that the old mode function in earlier versions of Excel couldn't handle. Hence why we now have 2 new formulas. So if we do mode.multi and select our cell range, let's close the bracket and hit enter. Notice that these results work like a dynamic array. They spill down into the other cells. Now I'm going to take the decimal places down all the way on these numbers, and I can now see that these 3 values occur 4 times in my data set. So you use mode multiple if you want to extract multiple results. Most of us are used to using min and max to find the largest and the smallest values in a range of data. But we also have a couple of functions called large and small, which will help us find not the largest and the smallest values, but the second, third, fourth, fifth largest and smallest values in a range of data. So let's take a look at how this works. Now the data that we're using here are just some album sales. We can see the year that the album was released, the artist, the album name, the genre that that album belongs to, and then we have the sales of that album. So in this first table, I want to find out what the top 5 sales totals were. So if I want to find out the top one, this is fairly straightforward. We can simply use max. Let's select our sales range, close our bracket, hit enter, and I can see that the top selling album sold 4.5 million copies. But what if I want to find the second, third, fourth, and fifth best-selling albums by sales total? Well, this is where I would use the large function. Now, if we type in equals large, notice that we have 2 arguments, array, and then we have k. Now, array is basically going to be what we want to return, which is going to be one of these sales values. And k is where we specify whether we want to return the second largest, the third largest, the fourth, so on and so forth. So if I want to return the second largest value, I can simply type a 2 in there. Now if I close my bracket and hit enter, it's going to tell me that the second best-selling album sold 3,300,000 copies. And actually looking at this, these shouldn't really be monetary values. This is the number of copies, so let's change that to number and take those decimal places down. And we'll also modify our formatting just here as well. We need to take that to number and take those down, and let's add a comma separator. Perfect. Now, if I want to copy this formula down like that, it's not really going to work, because for each formula, it's attempting to pull back the second largest. And also, because we didn't lock the table range, those cell references are moving down each time. So these 3 values that it's returning is not correct. So this is where using a cell reference for that k value can really help. So if we do large again, and let's select our array, and I'm going to lock it this time by pressing F4. And for our value, because we want to return the third largest, I'm going to use the cell reference that contains 3. Let's close the bracket and hit enter, and now I should be able to drag this value down, and I'm going to get the correct results. Similarly, we can use the small function to tell us what the second lowest, third lowest, fourth lowest values are. Now, if I want to find the lowest, I could use min. So we're going to select our range, close the bracket, hit enter, and there we get our min. Now, once again, I'm just going to change these to numbers. Now, if I want to find the second lowest, I can use small. We can select our array. This is exactly the same as using large. Press F4 to lock, and then I'm going to use the cell reference G5 as that k value. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now I can copy these down. So really nice and straightforward. Now, what if I want to move this on a little bit and maybe find the highest sales in the pop genre? Now, if I want to find the absolute highest, I could use the maxIfs function for this. So let's type in maxIfs. My max range, well, I want to return the sales again. So E4 to E32. And we're going to press F4 to lock that. And now we need to specify our criteria and our criteria range. Well, we only want to look for sales for albums in the pop genre. So our criteria range is going to be the genre, and we need to lock that. And our criteria is going to be pop. Now, I don't have that written out in a cell, so I'm just going to type it in quote marks into the formula. Let's hit enter, and that is the result that I'm getting. So let's apply the same formatting. And if I take a quick look, 4,500, well, I can see that sitting just there, and yes, that is in the pop genre. Now, if I want to find out the second largest, third largest, fourth and fifth in the pop genre, I could use large in a slightly different way. So we're going to do a large, but we're going to combine it with an if. So my logical test is if the genre, F4 to lock, is equal to pop. If that's true, we want to return the sales values, and we want to return the second largest. So I'm going to use a cell reference just here. And I also have to remember to lock this one, F4. And let's close off our large formula. Let's hit enter. We can copy this down and then apply our formatting. Let's do that again, but this time for the lowest sales in the hip hop genre. So once again, we can use min-ifs to find the very lowest value. So our min range is what we want to return. So that's going to be the sales. We need to do F4 to log. Our criteria and our criteria range, well, our criteria range is going to be genre, F4 to lock. And this time we're looking for hip hop. So we want to put that in quote marks. Close the bracket, hit enter, and there we go. And if we want to find out the second lowest, we can use small and combine it with if. Our logical test is if the genre, F4 to lock, is equal to hip hop, then we want to return, if that's true, the sales, F4 to lock, but we want to return the second largest. Close off our small function. Hit enter, and then we can safely drag this down. Last thing to do is just to apply some formatting. So let's add a comma separator and take those decimal places all the way down. So that is how you can use large and small, and also a little bit of a look at maxIfs and minIfs as well, if you weren't familiar with those two useful functions. In this lesson, we're going to talk about ranking data within a list. And the example that we're going to use is a list of movies in column A, and then in column B, we have the number of 5-star reviews that those movies have received. And what we want to do in column C is rank those movies according to the number of 5-star reviews. So effectively, I want to see which movies have the highest number of 5-star reviews all the way down to the bottom. Now, there are a couple of ways that I could do this, and the most obvious one would be to simply sort this column, column B, and have the highest value at the top going all the way down to the lowest. But the issue that you have when it comes to sorting is that it's going to sort the movie titles as well. And I want to keep these in the order that they're currently in. So instead, what I could do is I could have another column, column C, where I just list out the rank of each movie, which position in the list it falls into according to the number of 5-star reviews. So for this, we're going to use the rank function in Excel. Now, the first thing you'll notice here when you type in rank is that you get a number of different options come up in Excel's IntelliSense menu. And we're only really interested in the top 3. Now notice rank, which is the third one in this list, this function is the one that we used to use in older versions of Excel. And it's still there as a legacy feature for anybody who's still using a very old version of Excel. The functionality of the rank function has since been replaced with the function above, rank.eq. So this is the one that we're going to use for this first example. Let's press the Tab key to select it. Now the rank function has 3 arguments, number, reference, and then we have a third optional argument, order. And this is a really straightforward formula to use. The first thing we need to provide is the number that we want to rank, so that is going to be cell B4. The reference is what we want to rank it against. So I want to rank this value in cell B4 against the other values in column B. Now, because I don't have any other data other than the data that I'm currently using in column B, I could select the entire column simply by clicking at the top of the column heading. If I did have additional data further down here, it would work out better for me to highlight the exact cell reference. But for this example, we can use the column. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, and now I can double click to fill that formula down. So I can see that the movie 12 Angry Men is ranked 12th by the number of 5-star movie reviews. And if we scroll down and look through this list, I can see here, if I'm looking for the number 1 reviewed movie, I can see that it's The Departed. Now, when we typed in this formula, there was an additional optional argument on the end, which is order. Now, if I press the comma here, notice that we can choose if we want to rank these in descending, or ascending order. And the default here is descending. But if I change this to a 1 on the end, and press return, and then double click to copy that down, 12 Angry Men, if we're working from the bottom of the list, is in the 39th position. And effectively, the movie that's ranked 1 will be the one with the fewest 5-star reviews, and that one would be 7 Samurai. Now I'm going to just edit this formula, and I don't want to sort them in ascending order. Let's put that back to descending and double click to copy that formula down. Now, if I was to sort these 5-star reviews, this is going to make them a little bit easier to see. So let's go to data and let's sort these largest to smallest. Now, what would happen if I had 2 movies that achieved exactly the same number of 5-star reviews? So let's cheat a little bit here and change the one underneath the Green Mile to the same value. So 9714. Take a look at what happens to the rank. It's going to assign it the same number. Also notice that now it's skipped over number 5. Also notice that we don't have a movie ranked in the 5th position because we have 2 movies occupying the 4th position. So just something to be aware of when you're working with rank EQ. Let's take a look at another example. This time I'm going to show you rank average, which is the other function that we have in that drop-down list. Now what I have here are some dates and we have some calls logged. So maybe this is some information from a call center and we're just reviewing how many calls they logged on any particular day. So what I can do here, let's do a rank first of all. I'm going to do rank EQ again. Let's just select that one. My number is going to be the number of calls logged. And my reference, well, I want to compare it to the rest of the values in column B. I'm happy with the default of descending order, so I don't need that final argument. Let's hit enter, and then I can double click to copy that down. And this is going to show me the days that achieved the highest number of calls. And once again, I could sort this list to make it a bit easier, but I can see that this is in the number 1 position. So on January the 4th, 2022, we received the highest amount of calls of 197. Now, what about rank average? What does that one do? So let's type in equals. We're going to go for rank again, and the top option there is rank average. Now this has exactly the same arguments, so let's do the same thing. We're going to rank cell B4 against everything else in column B, and we're going to sort in descending order, so we'll just accept the default. I'm going to do Control Enter to stay in the same cell, and then I can double click to copy that down. Now I'm going to sort these calls in descending order to make this a bit easier to see. So let's sort largest to smallest, and you'll find that the rank average is the same for many of these. So you can see here for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so on and so forth, it's pretty much the same. But take a look at these first two. The rank average is 1.5, whereas the rank is 1. So what's occurring here? Well, effectively, the way that Excel works out the rank average is it says this value is in position 1 and this value is in position 2. So if you add 1 and 2 together, you get 3. And what would be the average of 3 over these two items? Well, it would be 1.5. So that is where it gets its average from. The same thing down here. This value is in position 16. This value is in position 17. So if you add 16 and 17 together, you get 33. What's 33 divided by 2? Well, it is 16.5. So that is the difference between rank and also rank average. COUNTBLANK is one of those formulas that pretty much does exactly what it says on the tin. It counts all blank cells in a selected range. And sometimes this can be really useful in many different scenarios. So let's take a look at how COUNTBLANK works. Now in this first example, we have a table on the left-hand side that just has some order IDs, some customer names, and then we have email addresses for some of our customers. Now it appears that some of the customers haven't left their email address when they've placed an order. So I've been tasked by my manager to go through all of our customers and tell him how many haven't left an email address. And this is really going to determine if we're going to spend any money on developing our order system and making email addresses mandatory prior to placing an order. So I can use the COUNTBLANK function for this. And it works exactly as you would expect. We're going to type in equals, and it's this one just here, COUNTBLANK. And we have one argument for this, and that is the range of cells. So all I need to do here is select this range, C4 to C23, and it's going to tell me that out of 20 customers, 7 of them have not left their email address. Now currently this data that I'm reviewing isn't in a table. So as I add more customers to the bottom of this list, my COUNTBLANK formula isn't going to update. So again, this is another reason why using tables is so important. Let's press Ctrl T, click on OK, and I'm going to leave the table style as it is. Let's give our table a name. We're going to call this Orders. And now I'm going to update my COUNTBLANK formula. So let's replace the cell reference with the table name this time and hit enter. So now if we add a new customer onto the bottom, so let's say the order number is 1020, and I'm just going to use my name, why not? Notice that my formula has updated, so now we have 8 people in the list who don't have an email address. Now if I was to add my email address in here, and I will say that this isn't my actual email address, but let's add one in and hit enter, that COUNTBLANK formula goes back down to 7 because it's no longer a blank cell. So make sure that you put your data in a table and then your COUNTBLANK formula will constantly update. Now another quick tip here, notice as I've entered in my email address, it's automatically turned it into a hyperlink. Now the other email addresses in here are not hyperlinked, so if you just want to remove that hyperlink and just have it as plain text, just right click on the cell and choose Remove Hyperlink. Let's take a look at another example of using COUNTBLANK. Now what I have in the table on the right hand side are a list of employees, and I have days of the week across the top, and then I have a Y which tells me on which days these employees are scheduled to work. And the first thing I want to do here is I want to just do a count of how many days each employee is working. So this is just a straightforward count A. I'm going to select this row, close the bracket and hit enter, and then I can copy that formula down, and that just lets me know how many days each of my employees is scheduled to work. Now, what about if my manager comes to me and he's looking at rearranging the scheduling around a little bit because we need more cover on certain busier days? What would be really useful to know is how many employees are off on Mondays, how many are off on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, so on and so forth. And this is where the COUNTBLANK function can come in really handy in a practical example. So let's go for COUNTBLANK. Our range, we just want to select Monday. Close the bracket, hit enter, and then I can drag this formula across and I can see how many employees we have off each day. So on Saturday, we have the most amount of employees off, but Friday and Saturday are our busiest evenings. So this is really going to help my manager when it comes to analysing how he wants to reorder the scheduling of staff. So COUNTBLANK can be used in many different situations and is a really useful formula to have in your Excel toolkit. It's time now to do exercise 4. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section. So in the first part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice using average, median and mode. And I'd like you to find the average, median and mode for the numbers in the table. And I want you to ensure that when you're calculating the mode, you return all values that occur more than once. In the second part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice using the large and small functions. So first, I'd like you to find the top 3 largest values in the table, and then I'd like you to return the corresponding product. So think about the formula you might need to use in order to do that. I'd then like you to find the top 3 smallest values in the table, and then return the corresponding product. And when you're doing this, I'd like you to ensure that you use cell references instead of hard-coded values wherever possible, and also ensure that you apply the correct absolute referencing. And in the final part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice using the rank function. So I'd like you to rank the scores of each student in descending order. And then finally, I'd like you to sort the table by rank so the highest scoring students are at the top. So give that a go. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was find the average, median and mode for the numbers in the table. So this is pretty straightforward. We're going to go into an average calculation. We need to select all of the numbers in the table, and that's going to give us the average. Next, we need to find the median. So again, this is a straightforward calculation. We're going to select all of the numbers again and hit enter. And that is our median value. Again, note that the median value is different to the average. Finally, I asked you to find the mode of the numbers in the table. And I added a little note here to ensure that when calculating the mode, make sure you return all values that occur more than once. So the reason why I specified that is because when we go into mode, we have 2 options here, mode.mult or mode single. So if we want to return all values that occur more than once, we need to use mode.mult. Let's select our values once again. Close the bracket, hit enter, and I can see that those values occur more than once in the table. Let's move on to the next worksheet. So the first thing I wanted you to do here was to find the top 3 largest values in the table and then return the corresponding product. Now when it comes to finding the largest, I could use the large function or I could still use max here. So if you used either of those, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to go with large. Let's select it. I'm looking for the largest value, so this is our array, and I want to find the largest, so that is my second argument. Now I also mentioned in the notes that we need to use cell references wherever possible. So instead of typing in here 1 to return the largest, I'm going to use the cell reference that contains the number 1. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. Now, because I want to copy this formula down, I need to make sure that I'm locking the sales array in the table. So let's make sure that we F4 just there, hit enter, and then I can copy this down. Now, in order to find the product, I can do a simple index and match. So let's type in equals index. What do we want to return? Well, we want to return the product name this time, so that's our array. Again, we need to lock that because we want to drag this formula down. We now need to find the row number, so let's go straight into a match. We're going to use the sales value as the lookup value, comma. Where are we looking that up? Well, we're looking it up in the sales array, F4 to lock, and we want to do an exact match. Close off match, close off index, Control Enter, and now we can drag this down. Let's do exactly the same to find the top 3 smallest values in the table. So this is a very similar process. We're just using the small function instead. So we're looking for the smallest sales value in this array, F4 to lock. And we want to find the smallest. I'm going to use a cell reference, close the bracket, Control Enter, and then we can copy down. Now, once again, to find the product, I could use an index and match. I could even use an XLOOKUP here if I wanted to. So let's just switch it up and go for that instead. So let's say XLOOKUP. Our lookup value is F11. We're looking it up in this array just here. We need to lock that, F4, and our return array is going to be the product, F4 to lock. Close the bracket, Control Enter, and now we can copy that down. Let's move on to the final part of this exercise, which was using the rank function. So I wanted you to use rank to rank the scores of each student in descending order. So let's do this part first of all. I'm going to click in column D and we're going to use our rank function. Now remember, we have a few to choose from here. We want to choose rank EQ. Now the numbers that we want to rank are in this array just here. And again, I want to copy this down. So we're going to do F4. What's our reference? What am I ranking them against? Well, I'm ranking them against each other. So my second part is going to be this cell reference again, F4 to lock. I can then specify if I want to rank them in descending or ascending order. And I asked you to rank them in descending order. So we want a 0 on the end here. Let's close the bracket, Control Enter, and take a look at that. I now have a rank assigned to all of those scores. Now in the final part of this exercise, I asked you to sort the table by rank so the highest scoring students are at the top. Now if you try to click in rank and then use your sort command, so sort in ascending, you'll find that you get this message just here. Now the way that we can overcome that is simply to throw away the underlying formula. So let's select Control C to copy, and then we can simply paste the values. Now we can go to the Data tab, we can sort A to Z, and we can see our top ranked student at the top. In this lesson, we're going to talk about rounding values, and specifically 3 functions, round, round up, and round down. And these 3 functions are excellent functions to know, but are particularly important if you work in the financial sector, where being extremely accurate with money is the highest priority. So let's take a quick look at how rounding works. Now in this first table, I just have some order IDs. I have a price, and then I have the price plus tax. And you can see over here, we have a sales tax rate of 2.5%. Now the price plus tax, I've already added in the calculation for this. And this is a very straightforward calculation that most of us probably know how to do by this stage. We're doing B4, which is the price, multiplied by the sales tax, 2.50, and then we're adding on the price again. Because if we don't add on that price, if I was just to remove this, it's just going to give us the amount to increase by. So we do need to make sure that we are, in addition, adding on the price again to the sales tax amount to get the total. So for this first order, order 1000, the price is $4.88. The price plus tax is $5. Now, what about if this customer just here decided that they wanted to order 1,000 items? What is the price going to be? Well, this is a fairly straightforward calculation that most of us can do in our mind, because it's simply going to be the price multiplied by 1,000. 5 multiplied by 1,000 is 5,000. So effectively, when we do this calculation, we should get a result of 5,000. Let's see what happens. I'm going to type in equals. Let's do C4 multiplied by the volume and hit enter. Take a look at that. I don't get 5,000, I get 5,002. Now, why am I getting 5,002 and not 5,000? Well, this is because of this number just here. Notice that I'm displaying 2 decimal places. Now, the mistake that a lot of people make when they're looking at numbers is that they think that this is the actual real value of the number. But because we've minimized this down to 2 decimal places, if I was to increase these decimals and reveal a few more of those numbers underneath, you're going to start to see why we're getting a result of 5002. As I increase the decimals, and I've just increased them by 1, the actual number is 5002, which is why when we multiply it by 1,000, we're getting a result of 5002. Because increasing and decreasing these decimal places doesn't actually change the underlying value, you're just changing the way that the number is displayed. Now, how can we get this to be accurate? Because we do want this to say 5,000. Well, this is where we can use rounding. So we're going to use the round function to make sure that we're rounding to an even number of pennies. So let's click on this cell. We're going to jump up to the formula bar and we're going to use the round function. Now, notice in the drop-down list there, we have a few different options. We're going to choose the first one. The first argument here is the number. Now, the number is going to be generated by the formula that we already have in this cell. So if we just click at the end and press comma, the only other argument we have here is the number of digits. So how many decimal places are we rounding to? So I want to round to the penny, so I'm going to round to 2 digits. If I wanted to round to the dollar, I would have a 0 in here. So let's go for 2. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And would you take a look at that? Now our answer has changed to 5,000. And if I start to copy this formula down, some of these will change, some of them may not. And I can then double click to copy this formula down. Now, it might be that you want to override the standard rounding rules and round up or round down to a specific number of decimal places. Well, as you might have guessed, we have 2 functions that can help us with that, and they are called round up and round down. So let's edit our formula, and this time we're going to use round up. I'm going to keep it rounding up to 2 decimal places, and if we hit enter, notice that now it's rounded it up to the next penny. If I wanted to round it up to the next dollar, I would put a 0 in here, and it's going to round it up to 6. Now, I don't want that. I want to round it to the penny, so let's put that back to 2. And once again, I can double click to copy that formula down, and you may have noticed that some of these numbers also changed. And of course, we can do the opposite of this. We can use the round down formula instead. I'm going to keep it on 2 decimal places. Let's hit enter. It's rounded down to 5. If I double click, again, some of these are changing and rounding down to the nearest penny. So just be aware of that when you're working with rounding. Make sure you understand the different options that you have and whether you're rounding to the nearest penny, the nearest dollar, so on and so forth. Now, before we leave this lesson, there's just one final thing that I want to show you. Now, in column A, we have some salaries, and all of the people who have these salaries have got a bonus of 2.15%. And we have their new salary, including that bonus, in column B. But do you notice one difference between column B and column A? In column B, all of these salaries are nice and neat. They're rounded nicely to the dollar, whereas the original salaries aren't. Now, the way that you can do that, and I've already written this formula out in this column, is I'm using round up. We're doing our calculations, so we're doing A29, which is the salary. We're multiplying it by the percentage of bonus, and then we're adding the salary again. But take a look at this last argument. We're doing a -2 for the number of digits. And this method will basically round to the nearest $100. If I was to replace this with a -1, it's going to round to the nearest $10. So let's change that and copy it down, and you'll see that all of these will change. So again, just be aware that you can use minus figures as well as this last argument for the number of digits. In this lesson, we're going to explore some specialized rounding functions. And these are all in the rounding wheelhouse, but they do slightly different things. So the functions that we're going to be looking at in this lesson are mround, ceiling, and floor. So let's take a look at the data that we're going to be using. So in column A, we have some order IDs. In column B, we have price. And then in column C, we have the price plus tax. So pretty much the same as the last example we were looking at. And there is the sales tax that we're using to perform this calculation. And we already have rounding applied to this to 2 decimal places. Now, what if I want to do something slightly different? Maybe I want all prices to be multiples of 5 cents, or 10 cents, or 20 cents, or maybe 50 cents. Well, if we want to do that, then we can use the mround function, which is going to allow us to round to a variety of different multiples. So instead of round, let's choose mround. And I can simply add an m onto the front here. Now, mround has 2 arguments, number and multiple. And once again, the number is going to be generated by the formula that we currently have. Now, I want to get rid of the multiple on the end there because we want to specify what multiple we want to round by. So maybe I want to round to the nearest 50 cents. So I'm going to put in here 0.50. And let's double click to copy this down. And this now looks a lot neater because we've rounded to the nearest 50 cents. If I wanted to round to the nearest 20 cents, I could change that to 0.2 and hit enter. And then when we copy this down, you're going to see those figures change. 0.1 for the nearest 10 cents. Once again, we can double click to copy down and note our changed values. So mround is a really flexible function which will just allow you to round to different multiples. Now, what are ceiling and floor? Well, these work along the same lines, but ceiling means we're rounding up, whereas floor means we're rounding down. So ceiling works like mround, where we can specify our own multiple, but it's going to round up, and floor lets us specify our own multiple, but it's going to round down. So if I was to change mround to ceiling, notice that the ceiling function is one of those legacy functions. So it's since been replaced with the ceiling.math function. So let's select that. We have 3 arguments: number, significance, and mode. Now the number, once again, is going to be generated by the formula that we already have. Let's delete out our previous multiple. The significance argument is basically the multiple. It's just been named something slightly different in this function. So if I want to round up to the next 50 cents, I would do exactly the same thing, put 0.50 in here. And then there is a third argument, which is also optional, and that is mode. A mode is really there to deal with negative values that you have in your data. And you can specify if you want to round towards or away from 0. Now, we don't have any negative values, so we don't need that argument. Let's press enter, and you can see what happens. It's now rounding it up to the nearest 50 cents. And I'm sure you can guess what floor does. Pretty much the same thing, but the opposite way around. Let's replace ceiling.math with floor. Again, we have the same situation here. Floor is an old function that has since been replaced with floor.math. The same arguments here. So this time, let's round down to the nearest 10 cents. Press enter, and let's double click to copy that down. And there we go. So 3 additional rounding functions there, which are really handy to know, particularly if you work in the financial industry. The aggregate function is a great little function to know. What it does is it enables us to calculate aggregates like sum, average, count, min, max, whilst ignoring things like errors, hidden rows, subtotals. And one of its main uses that I find is to perform some calculations and ignore any errors that we have in cells. Now, aggregate, if you're looking for it in the functions library, if we click on the formulas tab, you'll actually find it under the math and trig group. And it's this one just here. And if we take a look at the screen tip, it says it returns an aggregate in a list or database. So let's take a look at a quick example of how this works. On the spreadsheet, I just have a very simple list. We have just some items, and then we have the price for those items. Now notice that I have a couple of cells in this price column that contain errors. I've got some div errors in there. Now it might be that instead of taking up time trying to work out why I'm getting these div errors, I just want to perform a calculation on the rest of the prices. Well, aggregate is going to allow me to do that because it's going to let me ignore any error values that I have in cells. So let's type in equals aggregate. Now the first argument is producing a drop-down list. So we need to select here what kind of calculation we want to do. Do we want to do an average or a count or a min or a max? Well, I want to do a sum. So I can simply type in number 9, or I can select it from the list by pressing the tab key, comma, to move on to the next argument. Now this is where I can specify what criteria I want to ignore. And it's definitely worth taking a look through some of these. Number 3 in particular is pretty hardcore because it will ignore hidden rows, error values, nested subtotals, and also other aggregate functions. Now in this first example, we're going to start off with a very basic number 6. We want it to ignore those div errors that we have in the cells. So once again, I could just type in number 6, or I can select it from the menu and press the tab key. Now notice underneath where we can see our arguments, we have 2 different ways that we can put together an aggregate. Now the one that we're currently doing is this bottom one. We've provided the function number, the options, and now we need to provide the reference. So this is basically just the column that we want to aggregate. So I'm going to select B4 to B14. Let's close off the function and hit enter, and it's adding up all of those numbers and ignoring these 2. Now let's take a look at another example. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply some filters to these headings, and I'm going to hide some rows. So let's say that I'm only interested in blouses, dresses, hats, and let's go for trousers and sportswear. Click on OK. So now my data contains both hidden rows and also we still have this error value in here. So I want to use the aggregate function so I can do a count, but I want it to ignore the hidden rows and I want it to ignore the errors as well. So let's type in aggregate. This time we're going to do a count, so that is number 2, comma. Now we want to ignore hidden rows and error values. And that is the option that we have all the way at the bottom, option number 7, comma. The last thing we need to provide is the cell range, which is B5 to B14. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And I just need to change the formatting on this cell and take those decimal places down. It's telling me that we have 4 items. And notice that we do once we're ignoring this item just here. So we have blouse, hat, dress, and sportswear. So aggregate is a super useful function if you want to perform some kind of aggregation, but you want to ignore certain values. It's time now to complete exercise 5, where we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section of the course. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to practice rounding. So I'd like you to calculate the total including tax in column D for each of the invoices. And you can see we have the sales tax amount listed in cell G3. And I'd like you to ensure that when you do this calculation, you round up to 2 decimal places. In the next part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice more specialised rounding. So I'd like you to calculate the bonus for each employee in column C. I'd then like you to calculate the new salary for each employee in column D. And then I'd like you to use specialized rounding to round the new salary to the nearest $100. So think about which function allows you to do that. And then in the final part of this exercise, I'd like you to practice using the aggregate function. So I'd like you to use the aggregate function to complete the total and the average of all prices, including tax. And when you perform this calculation, I'd like you to ignore errors and hidden rows. See how you get along with that, and if you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first part of this exercise is fairly straightforward. The first thing we need to do here is calculate the total including tax in column D. So we're going to do a sum here, and we're going to say C4 multiplied by G3, and we need to lock that cell reference because we want to copy this down, and then we want to plus the amount. Now currently I haven't applied any rounding to this at all, and that was the second part of this exercise. I wanted you to ensure that you rounded up these totals to 2 decimal places. So we need to make a modification to this formula, and we need to specify that we want to round up. The number is going to be generated by our sum calculation, so we can jump straight to the end and just specify how many digits we want to round up to. So in this case, that is 2 digits, close the bracket, Control, Enter, and then we can double click to copy down. Nice and straightforward. Let's move on to the second part of this exercise where I asked you to use specialized rounding to calculate the new salary. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to calculate the bonus for each employee in column C. So we just want the bonus amount, so we can just do B3 multiplied by G2. Remember, F4 to lock, Control, Enter. Let's double click to copy this down. Now we need to work out what the new salary is. So that's going to be a straightforward sum calculation of adding salary and bonus together. So let's do that first of all. We're going to say equals sum, and we just want to do B3 plus C3, Control, Enter, and if I copy this down, take a look at these numbers. They're kind of a bit all over the place. We want these to be nice multiples of 100. So what we can do here is use the mRound function. So let's go up to the formula bar and edit this first one. We're going to use mRound. The number will be generated by the sum calculation, and then we just need to specify the multiple. Now I want to round to the nearest $100. So I'm just going to type in 100. Close the bracket, Control, Enter. And now when I double click to copy this down, you can see we get nice rounded numbers to the nearest $100. The final part of this exercise was to use the aggregate function to complete the total and average for all of the prices inclusive of tax. And I wanted you to ignore errors and hidden rows. So if you take a look at my data, I have some calculations going on here, but I also have some errors in my data as well. So I still want to perform a total and an average, but I want to ignore those errors and also any hidden rows. And I can see that I've got a hidden row here. Row 16 is currently hidden. So let's do the total first of all. We're going to go into aggregate. We now need to choose our function. Now I want to use sum. So I could just type in 9 or use my arrow keys and select it. Now I can choose what I want to ignore. So I want to ignore hidden rows and error values. So the one that closest fits that is the bottom one just here, comma. We now need to select the array that we want to find the total of. So that is this array just here, and that is pretty much all we need. Close the bracket, hit enter, and we get our total. We need to do exactly the same, but this time we're going to do an average. So let's select aggregate. We're doing an average. Let's type in number 1, and we want to do the same thing. So number 7 to ignore hidden rows and error values. Let's select our array, close the bracket, and hit enter. And now I can apply my number formatting. So I'm going to take the decimal places for this one down to 2, And let's add a comma separator. I think that looks a lot better.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.